You're telling me you can fix this? 100 of the best mechanics have failed.
They were looking at the wrong part. There you go. Fixed.
A $3 million hypercar. Dead. Silent. Humiliating its owner in front of everyone. 100 of the world's most elite automotive specialists had been staring at it for 6 hours. Laptops open, diagnostic tools running, fingers pointing at each other. Nothing worked. Not one of them had an answer. The billionaire standing in her Italian heels was 30 seconds away from calling her lawyers. Then a janitor, a man nobody in that room had ever bothered to learn the name of, set down his mop, walked through the crowd, and asked one single question that changed everything. If you want to know what he said, stay with me until the end. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story has traveled. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Now let's begin. The alarm on Logan Hayes' phone went off at 4:47 every morning, 13 minutes before it was supposed to. He'd set it that way years ago, back when Emma was still small enough to crawl into his bed and steal the blankets. She didn't do that anymore. She was 10 now, with opinions about her own breakfast and strong feelings about which cartoons were babyish, but Logan still woke up at 4:47 out of pure muscle memory. Some habits don't die. They just become part of who you are. He lay there for a moment in the dark of his apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that the landlord had promised to fix 3 times. The radiator knocked against the wall. Outside, a garbage truck was making its slow, grinding way down Callaway Street, and somewhere above him, the upstairs neighbor's dog was already pacing, the same circuit it made every single morning, back and forth, like it was trying to wear a groove into the floor. Logan sat up. The apartment was small. That was the honest word for it. Not cozy, not compact, not efficiently designed. Small. The living room doubled as his office, which mostly meant there was a folding table in the corner with a broken leg propped up by a textbook he'd never opened. The kitchen was galley style, meaning one person could stand in it comfortably if they didn't move their elbows. Emma's bedroom was the biggest room in the place because that had been non-negotiable when he signed the lease, and the landlord had looked at him like he was strange for insisting on it. He didn't care what the landlord thought. He shuffled to the kitchen and started the coffee. The cheap kind. The kind that came in a red can and tasted like someone had described coffee to a person who'd never had it. And that person had done their best. He drank it black. Not because he had refined taste, but because the creamer had been finished 2 days ago, and he kept forgetting to buy more. While the coffee brewed, he checked his phone. 2 texts from his supervisor at Meridian Motorworks. The garage where Logan had worked for the past 4 years. He opened them. Big delivery today. Sterling's Alara X7 coming in for its annual service check. All hands spotless. Management wants the place immaculate. Then, 30 seconds later, that means you, Hayes. Make it shine. Logan set the phone face down on the counter. He already knew about the Alara X7. Everybody in the automotive world knew about the Alara X7. It was one of only 11 in existence. A hand-built, twin-turbocharged hypercar that the manufacturer had spent 4 years developing and another 2 years refusing to sell to anyone they didn't personally approve of. The waiting list read like a guest list for a summit of nations. Sheikhs. Tech founders. Old European money that had survived 2 world wars and 3 recessions. Victoria Sterling had gotten hers because she'd co-developed the battery management software that the Alara's hybrid system ran on. Logan knew this because he'd read about it. He read about a lot of things. He just didn't talk about them because nobody at Meridian Motorworks had ever asked. He finished his coffee, checked Emma's door. Still closed, still quiet, the small light of her nightlight glowing gold under the gap, and went to take a shower. Meridian Motorworks wasn't a garage in any ordinary sense of the word. It occupied a converted warehouse in the financial district. 3 stories of climate-controlled, white-walled, epoxy-floored space that looked more like a museum than a repair shop. The lighting was the kind that cost more per fixture than Logan made in a week. The waiting area had leather chairs imported from a furniture maker in Milan, and the coffee machine in the client lounge dispensed things with Italian names that Logan had never learned to pronounce. The cars that came through Meridian were not fixed. They were restored, recalibrated, enhanced. The language mattered because the clients were paying for an experience, not a service. You didn't tell a man whose net worth had 8 figures that his car needed an oil change. You told him his vehicle required its scheduled performance optimization. Logan had worked there for 4 years and had become genuinely fluent in that language, not because he used it, but because he understood it, the way a person understands a joke in a language they've never formally studied. He arrived at 6:15, an hour before most of the technical staff. The garage was quiet at that hour, just the hum of the HVAC system and the distant sound of someone in the back lot doing something with a pressure washer. Logan started with the floors, which was always the floors, because the floors were what Victoria Sterling's people had apparently specified in their pre-arrival checklist. Immaculate, that was the word. Immaculate floors. He mopped in long, even strokes, working his way from the back of the building toward the front, the way he always did. He didn't wear headphones. Some of the other cleaning staff wore headphones. He understood why, he wasn't judging, but Logan had always preferred to hear what was happening around him. It was a habit from a different life. By 7:30, the technical team was filtering in. He knew their names because he paid attention. Marcus Webb, the lead technician, 38 years old, a heavy-set man with thick forearms and a collection of manufacturer certifications that took up most of one wall in his office. Marcus had worked on Formula One pit crews for 6 years before a shoulder injury forced him out of the racing circuit. He was good at his job. He knew it. Sometimes that second part was a problem. Then there was Priya Okafor, the diagnostic specialist, the woman with the laptop who could read a car's error codes the way a doctor read an X-ray. She was 31, relentlessly precise, and had the particular quality of someone who had been the smartest person in every room she'd entered since approximately the 3rd grade. She was almost always right. The almost was important. There were others, 12 full-time technicians, 4 apprentices, 2 service advisors. And then there was the support staff, which included Logan and 2 other maintenance workers named Denny and Sal. Denny was 54 and had bad knees and told the same 3 stories about his time working at a racetrack in Florida in the 90s. Sal was 23 and was only there until her nursing program started in the fall. And then there was Logan. He finished the floors by 8:15 and moved to the glass, the massive floor-to-ceiling windows along the building's west wall, which caught the morning sun and showed every fingerprint and streak. He was on the 3rd panel when he heard the sound of the transport vehicle pulling into the lot outside. He stopped what he was doing. Not obviously, not in a way anyone would notice. He just paused for a moment. His hand still held the squeegee. His eyes tracked to the window. The transport was a custom-enclosed trailer, the kind with hydraulic lowering ramps and interior lighting and more insulation than most people's homes. The truck pulling it was matte black. No markings. Logan watched as the driver, a young guy, couldn't have been more than 25, wearing a logoed jacket and sneakers that were too clean for someone who loaded and unloaded cars for a living, guided the truck into the lot. The problem happened at the entrance to the parking area. There was a speed bump there, a moderate one, clearly marked, that every other driver who had ever delivered a vehicle to Meridian had slowed almost to a stop for. It was protocol. It was on the printed delivery guidelines that Meridian sent to every transport company they worked with. The young driver hit it at maybe 15 miles per hour. The entire trailer lurched, a sharp, violent jolt that sent a visible shudder through the vehicle from back to front. Logan heard it from inside the building, a hard, flat sound, like something heavy shifting inside a box. He felt his stomach tighten. He kept cleaning the glass. The Elara X7 came off the transport ramp to quiet, involuntary applause. That was what happened. Nobody planned it. Nobody organized it. The mechanics just drifted toward the lot as the word spread through the building, and when the car rolled down the ramp, matte midnight blue, low and wide, with lines that looked like they'd been drawn by someone who'd spent their whole life thinking about motion. A few people started clapping without meaning to. Marcus Webb stood in front of it with his arms crossed and his head tilted slightly, the way a person looks at a painting they've heard about but never seen. Even Priya, who prided herself on professional detachment, had her chin up and her eyes moving across the body panels with something that looked suspiciously like admiration. Logan watched from the equipment corridor, a narrow pass-through between the main bay and the supply room, with a clean rag draped over one shoulder and his mop cart parked at his side. He watched the driver hand over the paperwork, watched Marcus sign it without really reading it, watched the transport crew pull away. The driver who'd hit the speed bump was already back in the cab of the truck. Nobody had said anything about the jolt. Logan considered mentioning it. He turned the thought over in his mind, tested its weight, tried to imagine the conversation. "Hey, Marcus, I was watching from inside and I noticed the transport hit that speed bump pretty hard. It might be worth checking the—" Marcus would look at him, and Logan would see it. That particular look, the one that wasn't quite contempt and wasn't quite dismissal, but was its own thing. The specific expression of a person who has decided that the person talking to them does not belong in the conversation they are trying to have. He'd seen that look before, a long time ago, on different faces, in a different world. And then he'd made a decision, a deliberate, considered decision, to step out of that world entirely, to become someone who cleaned floors and maintained equipment and went home to his daughter every evening, to become invisible. He chose invisible. He pushed his cart back toward the supply room and got to work on the bathroom tiles. The routine service check on the Elara X7 was scheduled to take 4 hours. It took 45 minutes. Not because the team was efficient, but because at 10:23 in the morning, 45 minutes into the inspection, Priya plugged her diagnostic laptop into the vehicle's OBD port, ran the standard initialization sequence, and the car simply refused. "That's strange," she said. It was the first thing she said. Just that, in a quiet, controlled voice, the voice of a person who notices that something is strange before they know whether to be alarmed by it. Marcus was at her shoulder immediately. "What?" "It's not booting." "What do you mean it's not booting?" "I mean exactly what I said, Marcus. The diagnostic interface is not initializing. The car's system isn't responding." Marcus straightened up. He had a particular way of processing unexpected information. He would go still for a moment, very still, and then his face would cycle through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, irritation, and then a kind of aggressive confidence, as if the act of being visibly certain could make reality cooperate. "Restart the interface," he said. "I've restarted it twice." "Try the backup software." "I'm already running it." They tried ignition. Nothing. The car, which should have started with the deep, measured exhale of 1,100 horsepower coming to life, produced a small clicking sound and went silent. Priya looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the car. The car said nothing. "Call the manufacturer's technical line," Marcus said. By noon, there were 17 people standing around the Elara X7. By 2 in the afternoon, there were more than 40. The manufacturer's technical team had joined remotely. 3 engineers on a video call projected onto a screen they'd wheeled into the main bay. And they were deep in a discussion about firmware versions and update protocols that had been bouncing between English and what Logan suspected was German, though he was only picking up pieces of it from across the garage. Because Logan was still there, still working. He'd finished the bathroom tiles, done a full restocking of the supply room, cleaned the grease trap in the service bay on the north end of the building, and was now running a polishing cloth over the glass cases that displayed various client memorabilia along the east wall. Championship trophies, signed photographs, a framed piece of carbon fiber from some legendary car that had done something remarkable in 1987. He moved slowly along the wall. His cart was nearby. He was close enough to hear everything. "The firmware update pushed at 9:40 this morning," one of the remote engineers was saying. His voice was thin through the laptop speakers. "We've had no other reports of failure following this update. The update itself is verified. There should be no conflict with the Elara's existing system architecture." "Then why isn't it working?" Marcus said. He was using his reasonable voice now, the one that sounded calm but had a structural tension underneath it, like a cable pulled too tight. "We're analyzing the log data now. It appears the system entered a protected state during the update sequence. We're looking at approximately 3 to 4 hours to identify the source, and 3 to 4 hours." Marcus repeated the phrase the way people repeat phrases when they want everyone around them to understand that what they just heard was unacceptable. "That's our current estimate, yes. This car belongs to Victoria Sterling." A brief pause from the laptop. "We understand the situation." "Do you? Because she has an event tonight that she specifically—" "Marcus." Priya said his name once, quietly. He stopped. Logan turned to polishing the next case. Victoria Sterling arrived at Meridian Motorworks at 3:17 in the afternoon. Logan knew what she looked like from the same places he knew most things. News articles, industry publications, The occasional photograph that appeared in a business magazine someone had left in the employee lounge. She was 30 years old, and she had the kind of presence that people described as commanding when they were being professional and intimidating as hell when they were being honest. She was dressed the way people dress when they haven't had to think about whether they look good in years. Dark slacks, a structured jacket in a deep burgundy, her hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless because she'd been doing it long enough that it was effortless. She had a phone in her hand and a woman with a tablet following 3 steps behind her. She walked through the front entrance of Meridian, past the leather chairs and the Italian coffee machine, and into the main bay without breaking stride. She looked at the cluster of technicians around her car. She looked at the laptop screen with the remote engineers. She looked at the car itself, which was still and silent and completely unresponsive. She did not say anything immediately. Marcus moved toward her. "Ms. Sterling, thank you for coming in. We're making significant progress on—" "Is my car running?" she said. "Not at this moment, but then you haven't made progress." She said it without heat, which somehow made it worse. She said it the way a person states a fact, the way you might say that it's raining outside. Not angry, just accurate. She walked to the car and stood beside it, and Logan, from his position 20 feet away with a polishing cloth in his hand, watched her face as she looked at the vehicle. It wasn't anger he saw there exactly. It was something more complicated. There was frustration in it, yes, but underneath that, something that looked like disappointment. Like a person looking at something they loved that had let them down. He recognized that expression. He'd worn it himself once, a long time ago. He turned back to the trophy case and kept polishing. By 4 o'clock, Marcus had made a decision. He'd decided that the issue was almost certainly the firmware update, that the manufacturer's team was incompetent, and that the solution was to attempt a full system rollback using Meridian's proprietary override software, a tool they technically weren't supposed to use on manufacturer-warranted vehicles without explicit authorization, but which Marcus had used twice before without incident. He explained this plan to Victoria with the confidence of a man who has never been significantly wrong in front of an audience. She listened. She asked 2 questions, sharp, specific questions about the software's compatibility with the Alar's particular system architecture, and Marcus answered them in a way that suggested he understood the questions without quite answering them. She said, "Fine, do it." The rollback took 40 minutes. At the end of 40 minutes, the car was exactly as it had been before. Silent, unresponsive, thoroughly not running. Marcus stood back and looked at it with his hands on his hips. "Okay," he said, to nobody in particular. "Okay." Priya was already on her laptop, pulling up a different diagnostic interface. "I want to run the full module check. If the rollback didn't restore the boot sequence, there might be a hardware conflict in the—" "I'm calling our contact at the manufacturer's North American office," Marcus said. "This has gone beyond the technical team. That could take another 2 hours just to get someone on the phone. Then it takes 2 hours." Logan had moved on from the trophy cases. He was in the north corridor now, running a fresh mop along the baseboard, the kind of detail work that nobody noticed unless it was wrong. He could still see the main bay through the gap in the equipment wall. He could see Victoria Sterling sitting in one of the rolling chairs that someone had brought over. Not slouched, not relaxed, just sitting very still with her phone face down in her lap. Not looking at it, just sitting. The woman with the tablet was standing to her side, speaking in a low voice. Victoria shook her head once. Then she looked up, and for a brief moment, long enough to register, not long enough to mean anything, her eyes traveled across the bay and landed somewhere near the corridor where Logan was working. He didn't know if she actually saw him. He kept mopping. Emma texted at 4:45. "Dad, school is over. Where do I go?" He texted back. "Employee lounge. Ask Rhonda at the front desk. She knows you." 3 minutes later, "She gave me a cookie." Of course she did. It's oatmeal raisin. She means well. This is literally the worst cookie. He was smiling at his phone when Denny came up beside him with a fresh mop and the expression of a man who had just witnessed something worth discussing. 6 hours, Denny said. "You believe that? 6 hours? And they can't figure it out." "I heard," Logan said. "Marcus is losing his mind. You can tell because he keeps saying we're getting close, which is what he says when he has absolutely no idea." Denny leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. "You seen the car yet?" "Up close?" "A little. Beautiful machine. Tragic situation. He shook his head with the gravity of a man mourning something important. That's Sterling woman. She's scary calm. That kind of calm is scarier than yelling, you know what I mean? Yeah, Logan said. I know what you mean. You want to know what I think? Denny said, which was a question that didn't actually require an answer. I think they updated the software wrong. I think somebody in Germany pushed an update that wasn't ready, and now they're all covering their ass. Maybe, Logan said. What do you think? Logan looked down at his mop. He thought about the transport vehicle, about the speed bump, about the sound, that flat, hard crack, and the way the entire trailer had shuddered. He thought about a car he'd worked on 13 years ago. A different make, a different model, a different country entirely, and a race that should have been won and wasn't, and the reason it wasn't. I think, he said carefully, somebody should probably check the inertia switch. Denny blinked. The what? Never mind, Logan said. Go mop the south corridor, it's getting late. By 5:30, the count was somewhere past 100. That was the number Logan worked out in his head as he made his third circuit through the main bay with a fresh cart. 103 people, if you counted the remote engineers on the video call, which he did. Marcus's extended network had been activated. 2 former colleagues from his Formula One days who'd driven out from the north side of the city, a manufacturer representative who'd flown in from the regional office and arrived 40 minutes ago still in his travel clothes, a systems engineer who specialized in hybrid drive architecture and had the haunted look of someone who'd been pulled out of a meeting they very much wanted to be in. They had divided into subgroups, the way experts always do when they don't have an answer. It creates the impression of organized progress when what's actually happening is organized confusion. One group was focused on the power delivery system. Another was running a full sensor audit. The manufacturer's team had finally gotten a senior engineer on the call, a man in his 50s who spoke in precise, measured sentences and had, over the past 40 minutes, systematically ruled out every theory that had been proposed so far. The room was very loud and accomplishing nothing. Victoria Sterling was still sitting in the chair. She had, at some point in the last hour, removed her jacket. She had her phone in her hands now, not scrolling, just holding it, the way people hold things when they need something to do with their hands. The woman with the tablet had been sent to get coffee. She hadn't come back yet. Logan finished his circuit, returned to the north corridor, and sat on the edge of his cart. He was tired, not physically tired. That was a separate thing, a background hum. But tired in the way you get tired when you know something and you're not saying it. That was its own specific kind of exhaustion. He'd carried it before. He knew its weight. He looked at the main bay through the gap in the equipment wall. He looked at the Alara X7, which sat under the bright overhead lighting like a piece of evidence at a crime scene, beautiful and inert and surrounded by people who couldn't explain it. He thought about Emma in the employee lounge, eating a terrible oatmeal raisin cookie and probably reading whatever book she was currently midway through. She always had a book. That was a thing she'd gotten from her mother. That was something he tried not to think about too often. He thought about the sound the transport trailer had made when it hit the speed bump that morning. He thought about a race in Bahrain 13 years ago, and a car that had died on the warm-up lap, and a crew chief who had insisted it was the electronics, and 3 hours of searching through the wiring harness before someone finally checked the mechanical systems. They had lost that race by the time they found it. He stood up. He straightened his shirt. He didn't know why he did that. Straightened his shirt, except that there was something about what he was about to do that felt like it deserved something, some small gesture of preparation. He walked through the gap in the equipment wall and into the main bay. Nobody noticed him at first. That was the thing about being invisible. It worked even when you were walking directly into the middle of something. He passed 2 of the technicians without them registering his presence at all. He passed the group working on the sensor audit, and one of them shifted slightly to let him by without looking up from their laptop. He stopped about 10 feet from the car. Marcus was nearby. He was always nearby, near the center of whatever was happening, because that was where Marcus needed to be, talking with the manufacturer representative in the low, tense voice of 2 people who are being carefully polite with each other while privately blaming each other for something. Logan said, "Excuse me." Marcus kept talking. "Excuse me," Logan said again, a fraction louder. Marcus turned. His expression, when he saw Logan standing there in his maintenance uniform with his cart nearby and a rag still tucked into his belt, passed through several phases very quickly. First confusion, then recognition, then something that wasn't quite a frown but was related to one. Hayes. He said the name the way you say a word that showed up somewhere it doesn't belong. What do you need? Did anyone check the inertia switch? Logan said. The immediate vicinity went quiet. Not the whole bay. The whole bay was too large and too loud for that. But the cluster of people nearest to Logan went quiet, and that quiet spread outward in a small radius, the way these things do. Marcus stared at him. I'm sorry? The inertia switch, Logan said. He kept his voice level. He was aware of how he looked. He was aware of his uniform, of the rag on his belt, of the fact that he was holding a spray bottle of industrial cleaner because he'd forgotten to put it down. Some high-performance vehicles, especially older spec cars that retained legacy safety systems from their race origins, they have a mechanical inertia cutoff. It's designed to interrupt fuel flow after impact. Could have been triggered by a hard jolt. The silence around them had spread a little further now. A few faces had turned toward him. He recognized the expressions. The same quick, cataloging look that people give when someone unexpected says something in a register they weren't prepared for. Priya Okafor had looked up from her laptop. She had her head tilted slightly, and she was looking at Logan with an expression he couldn't quite read. Marcus, however, had landed on his expression, patient condescension. It was a specific look. Logan had seen it on a lot of faces over a lot of years. It said, I'm going to explain something to you slowly and carefully, because I have decided that you are not equipped to have this conversation at its proper pace. Logan, Marcus said, and he used the first name in a particular way, not friendly, but not cruel either, just deliberate, the way you use a first name to establish a dynamic. I appreciate you, trying to help. I do, but the Elara X7 is running a fully integrated drive-by-wire system. There is no standalone mechanical safety component. We're dealing with a software-level failure, and we have, he gestured broadly at the assembled crowd, literally over 100 specialists working on this. We're going to find it. Di Shan Juban. Has anyone physically examined the undercarriage? Logan said. We've run a full diagnostic. I didn't ask about the diagnostic. I asked if anyone had physically looked at the undercarriage. Something changed in Marcus's face. What are you suggesting exactly? I'm suggesting that the transport vehicle hit the speed bump at the entrance to this lot at approximately 15 miles an hour this morning. I was watching from inside when the delivery came in. The trailer took a significant impact. If the Elara has a legacy mechanical inertia cutoff, and some versions of this manufacturer's high-performance line do, because they retained it from their racing architecture as a safety redundancy, it would have been triggered by a jolt that severe. Complete silence now. Not just in their vicinity, actual, spreading silence through the main bay, the kind that happens when the room picks up on a frequency shift. Marcus opened his mouth. That's not possible, said a voice behind him. It was the manufacturer's senior engineer, the man in his 50s who'd been on the video call. He wasn't on the video call anymore. He was standing in front of the laptop, and he was looking at Logan with an expression that was very different from Marcus's. He was looking at Logan the way a person looks at something they've just realized they overlooked. The X7 does retain the legacy safety cutoff, the engineer said. He said it slowly, like he was hearing it in his own voice for the first time and checking whether it was true. It was part of our original racing spec safety package. We retained it as a mechanical failsafe in the hybrid system architecture. It doesn't appear in the standard diagnostic tree because it bypasses the electronic system entirely. The bay was very quiet. Marcus turned to look at the engineer, then back at Logan, then back at the engineer. Why didn't you mention this 6 hours ago? Marcus said. The engineer didn't answer that. Victoria Sterling had stood up. Logan noticed it. Noticed it because movement in his peripheral vision was something he'd trained himself to register, and because she moved differently from everyone else in the room. She moved deliberately. She crossed the floor from her chair to where the cluster had formed, and she stopped at the edge of the group, and she looked at Logan, not the way other people were looking at him, not the calculating look or the reassessing look or the embarrassed look. She looked at him directly, the way a person looks at something they intend to understand. What do we do? She said. She wasn't asking Marcus, she was asking Logan. The room registered this. Logan registered it. He said, I'll need someone to help me find the access point. He didn't use a laptop. He didn't use a diagnostic tool or a thermal camera or any of the specialized equipment that lined the shelves of Meridian's technical center. He used a small flashlight, his own, the one he kept clipped to his cart for checking under equipment, and a basic socket wrench, and the knowledge that lived in his hands from years of putting them inside machines and learning the language that machines speak when nobody's translating. The access panel was in the wheel well, not clearly marked, not obviously a panel at all, more of a seam in the composite bodywork that you'd only notice if you knew to look. Logan ran his fingers along it until he felt the slight give in the material, and then he found the 2 retention clips and released them. The panel came away cleanly. Behind it, a small cavity in the bodywork, maybe 6 inches across. And inside the cavity, a compact cylindrical component, matte black, with a single red button on its face and a tiny indicator light that was not lit. It should have been lit. "There it is," Logan said quietly. He said it mostly to himself. It wasn't a performance, wasn't an announcement. It was the way mechanics talk when they've been hunting something and they find it. Just that small, private acknowledgement. He pressed the button. The click was tiny, unremarkable. The kind of sound a pen makes when you click it. Logan stood up. He stepped back from the car. He looked at Marcus. "Try the ignition," he said. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the car. Then he walked to the driver's door, which someone had left open, and he reached inside and pressed the start button. The Alara X7 woke up. It didn't just start. It announced itself. The engine turned over once, twice, and then fired with a sound that filled every cubic inch of the building and kept going. A deep, resonant roar that vibrated in Logan's chest, that bounced off the epoxy floors and the high ceiling and the glass cases with the championship trophies on the east wall. It was the sound of something that was built to be alive, coming back to life. Everyone in the bay stood frozen, 103 people, and not one of them moved. The car sat there running, its exhaust note settling into a smooth, powerful idle, and the sound it made was the only thing happening in the room. Logan picked up his flashlight. He clipped it back to his cart. He began to turn away. "Wait," Victoria Sterling's voice. He stopped. She was standing 2 feet from him. He hadn't heard her cross the floor. She had a particular quality of movement, quiet, economic, intentional, that he recognized as the walk of someone who had been trained, at some point in their life, to enter rooms without disrupting them. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on anyone's face in a very long time. Not gratitude, not relief, not the vaguely horrified awareness of someone who has just watched 100 experts be corrected by a man with a mop cart. She was looking at him like a question she very much wanted answered. "Who are you?" she said. The engine of her car ran behind her, steady and deep, filling the silence between them. Logan looked at her. He thought about how to answer that question, how to compress the particular shape of a life into something that fit in a conversation. He looked down at his uniform, then back at her. "My name is Logan Hayes," he said. "I keep this building clean." Victoria Sterling shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "That's what you do. I asked who you are." And Logan realized, standing in the middle of a garage full of 100 silent experts while a $3 million car idled behind the woman asking the question, that he hadn't been asked that in a very long time. He wasn't sure, in this moment, that he had an easy answer. But she was waiting. And somehow, he didn't know exactly why, he found that he didn't want to look away. The engine ran on, and Logan Hayes, for the first time in 4 years, didn't reach for the mop. The engine was still running. That sound, deep, settled, almost arrogant in its steadiness, filled the building the way certain kinds of music fill a room, not just with noise, but with a presence that made the air feel different. It was the sound of something expensive, reminding everyone in the building of its cost. Logan stood with his flashlight clipped back to his cart and Victoria Sterling 2 feet in front of him, waiting. He'd had 4 years to practice not being seen. 4 years of making himself useful in the background, of occupying the periphery of rooms where things were happening, of learning to make his presence as unremarkable as the lighting or the temperature. He'd gotten good at it, genuinely good. And now this woman was standing in front of him with her jacket off and her arms crossed. Not defensively, just the way someone stands when they are fully, physically committed to receiving an answer. And the question she'd just asked was still floating between them, like smoke. Who are you? It's a long story, Logan said. I have time, Victoria said. She glanced back at her car, which was idling with the self-satisfied hum of something that had been held back too long. Apparently my evening is free now. Someone behind her, one of the technicians, Logan couldn't see who, made a small sound that might have been a cough or might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. The bay around them was still quiet in that unusual way, the way that happens when a crowd is pretending not to listen while listening very carefully. Ms. Sterling, Marcus Webb said, moving toward them. He had recovered mostly. His voice had the careful evenness of a man who has just watched something go sideways and is attempting to reframe it as planned. I'd like to apologize for the delay today. Obviously, we should have... Marcus. Victoria said his name with a patience that was, itself, a kind of firmness. I'll talk to you in a minute. Marcus stopped. He stood there for a moment, a large man in a room full of people, stopped mid-sentence by two words delivered without any particular heat, and something moved across his face. Not anger. Something closer to the awareness of a boundary he hadn't known existed until he crossed it. He stepped back. Victoria turned back to Logan. Walk with me, she said. It wasn't a question. Logan looked at his cart. He looked at the mop leaning against it, the spray bottles, the folded rags. Then he looked at Emma's text still on his phone screen in his pocket. The last one she'd sent 20 minutes ago, a single emoji of a bored face wearing a clock. I have to check on my daughter, he said. She's been waiting for me. Victoria blinked. Of all the things he could have said, he suspected that wasn't the one she'd been expecting. Your daughter is here? Employee lounge? She comes after school. A beat. Something in Victoria's expression shifted. Subtle, not dramatic, but Logan noticed it. The slight recalibration of someone who has just received information that changes the shape of what they thought they were looking at. Bring her, Victoria said. There's a sitting area in the client wing. She'll be more comfortable there. Logan considered this for a moment. He considered the offer itself, and the ease with which it was made, and the particular quality of confidence that let a person extend an invitation like that without a second thought. He considered whether Emma would want to be brought anywhere. She'll want to know if there's better food than oatmeal raisin cookies, he said. Victoria almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile. It was more of a controlled shift around the corners of her mouth, the expression of someone who has found something unexpectedly funny and is deciding whether to let it show. I'll have someone check the kitchen. Logan reached for his cart. Give me 5 minutes. He walked across the bay toward the employee corridor, and he felt the room watch him go. Not openly. Nobody turned to stare, but he felt it, the particular awareness of a crowd that has just had to reconsider something, making fine adjustments to where they're looking without fully committing to the motion. He'd felt it before. Once, a long time ago, it had felt like power. Right now, it mostly felt like being tired. Emma was in the employee lounge with a book open across her knees and the oatmeal raisin cookie on the table beside her, one bite taken out of it and the rest clearly abandoned. She was 10 years old and she had her mother's eyes, dark brown, direct, with the particular quality of someone who, even at 10, was paying more attention to what was happening around her than she let on. She looked up when Logan came in. There's a car running, she said. I could hear it all the way in here. It's really loud. Yeah, he said. We fixed it. She studied his face the way she sometimes did, that quiet, assessing look that made him feel, occasionally, like the child in the relationship. Are you okay? I'm fine. You look weird. Thank you, Emma. Not bad weird, just... She tilted her head. Different weird, like when you're thinking hard about something but trying not to look like you're thinking about it. Logan sat down in the chair across from her. He thought about how to explain what had just happened in a way that would make sense to a 10-year-old, and also in a way that didn't make it into a bigger thing than it was. He hadn't decided yet whether it was a big thing. Someone asked me a question, he said, and I'm not sure how to answer it. Emma thought about this with the seriousness she brought to things she considered important. What question? Who I am. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her book and put it in her bag with the efficient pragmatism of someone who has made a decision. I already know who you are, she said, so I can't help you with that. The person asking doesn't know. Then you should tell them. It's complicated. Emma zipped her bag. Dad, if you already know the answer and you're just scared to say it, that's not complicated. That's just scared. She looked at him. Right? He stared at his daughter. The car owner wants to talk to me, he said. She has a sitting area in the client wing. She said there might be better food than... He nodded at the abandoned cookie. Emma looked at the cookie. She looked at her bag. She looked at the door. Fine, she said. But if the food is also bad, we're leaving. The client wing of Meridian Motorworks was separated from the main facility by a pair of heavy glass doors and approximately $40,000 worth of interior design decisions. The floors here were actual stone, something pale and warm-veined that Logan had mopped more than once, while wondering who decided that stone floors belonged in a garage. The lighting was indirect. There were plants, real ones, that a service came to maintain on Tuesdays. The sitting area was arranged around a low table with 2 couches and a chair, and beside the chair was a small side table with a coffee setup that was significantly better than the one in the main lobby. A woman Logan didn't recognize, younger than Victoria's tablet-carrying assistant, probably part of the facility's client services team, was setting out a plate when they arrived. Emma stopped walking when she saw the plate. Are those macarons? She said. Yes, the woman said, with the practiced warmth of someone in a customer-facing role who was genuinely pleased to have chosen correctly. Emma looked at Logan. He could see the negotiation happening behind her eyes, the attempt to balance dignity with the fact that there were macarons on the table. She sat down on the couch and set her bag at her feet and maintained a careful composure. Victoria arrived 3 minutes later. She'd put her jacket back on, which meant she'd gone back to wherever she'd left it, which meant she'd taken some time before coming here. Logan noticed that. He noticed it the way he noticed the speed bump that morning, not because he was looking for it, but because he'd trained himself a long time ago to register things without making a decision about them immediately. She looked at Emma. Emma looked at her. There was a moment of mutual assessment between a 30-year-old billionaire and a 10-year-old with a macaron in her hand that Logan found privately very interesting. Hi, Emma said. She had decided not to be intimidated, which was its own form of social intelligence. Hi, Victoria said. She sat down in the chair across from the couch. For a moment, she looked at Emma with the specific expression of someone who is recalibrating a situation that has more dimensions than they expected. Then she looked at Logan. Is she... Emma, Logan said. My daughter. She told me there might be better food, Emma said helpfully. There is. Victoria looked at the macaron, then back at Emma. And this time the almost smile became an actual one. Brief, real, surprised out of her by the directness of a 10-year-old who had decided that a macaron was sufficient grounds for honesty. Good, Victoria said. The oatmeal raisin situation in the employee lounge has been a problem for some time. Emma considered this seriously. Someone should fix that. I agree. Victoria looked at Logan. The smile faded, not coldly, but the way focused attention replaces casual expression. Your daughter is right, by the way. About the cookies. I've mentioned it. I know, Logan said. I eat one every Friday. Why? Rhonda at the front desk makes them herself. She brings a batch every Friday. A pause. Oh, Victoria said. So nobody's going to tell her they're not great, Logan said. Victoria was quiet for a moment. That's... She stopped. Started again. That actually explains a lot. She crossed her legs, straightened slightly, and looked at him with the directness that seemed to be her default setting. How did you know about the inertia switch? Here it was. The question under the question, the one she'd been building toward since the bay. Logan put his hands on his knees. He looked at the low table for a moment, then back at her. Because I used to be on the other side of that room, he said. The side with the laptops. She waited. I was a race car technician, he said. International circuit. Mostly endurance racing, some open wheel work. 13 years. Victoria's expression didn't change dramatically, but something in it sharpened. She had the quality, he was noticing it more now, of a person who processes information very quickly but doesn't let that speed show on the outside. Which teams? Hartwell Motorsport for the first 4 years. Then I went independent, consulting work for 3 different manufacturer teams over the next 6. Last 3 years, I was chief technician for the Crescent Racing Consortium. Something crossed her face. Not surprise exactly, more like the particular expression of someone who has just heard a name that recalibrates the conversation. Crescent Racing, she said. They finished second at Le Mans 6 years ago. They did, Logan said. I watched that race. Most people who follow endurance racing watch that race. They were leading by 40 minutes with 2 hours left. Then the car died on the circuit. She looked at him steadily. That was you? That was my car, Logan said. And yes, that was me. Silence. Emma had gone still beside him, the macaron forgotten in her hand. She'd heard the broad shape of this before, knew her father had worked on cars, knew it was a long time ago, but not like this, not laid out this plainly in front of a stranger. The inertia switch, Victoria said quietly. The car took a curb hit in the final stint, Logan said. He kept his voice even. It was an old story. He'd had a long time to make it even. Hard enough to trigger the mechanical cutoff. We spent 90 minutes looking at the electronics. By the time someone thought to check the mechanical systems, we'd lost too much time. He stopped. He didn't elaborate. The story had a shape, and he'd told it to its natural end, and anything beyond that would have been for his own benefit rather than hers. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You left racing after that, and after other things, he said. He glanced at Emma, who was watching the conversation with the alert stillness of a child who knows she's hearing something she was never meant to hear and is trying to be invisible so the adults don't remember and stop. Emma's mother got sick about a year after the Le Mans race. I stepped back from the circuit to help with her treatment. She passed away 2 years later. He said it plainly, without ceremony, because ceremony was for other people. For himself, it had become something he carried the way you carry a weight that's been with you long enough that you've adjusted your posture to accommodate it. After that, I needed something that kept me in one place. Emma was very still. Victoria said nothing for a moment. Logan appreciated that about her. The fact that she didn't say I'm sorry for your loss in the automatic, reflexive way that people say it, the way it becomes almost meaningless through repetition. She just held the information for a moment, and he could see her doing it, and that was actually more respectful than the words would have been. So you came to Meridian, she said finally. The hours work, Logan said. I can start early, finish before Emma gets out of school, or she comes here when I have to stay late. Rhonda likes her. Because of the cookies, Emma said quietly. Despite the cookies, Logan said. A ghost of that smile again on Victoria's face. Then it was gone. You've been working here for 4 years, she said. It wasn't quite a question. 4 years and 3 months. And nobody knew. Not accusatory, just factual and slightly disbelieving. Nobody asked, Logan said simply. Victoria looked at him. She uncrossed her legs. She leaned forward slightly, and he could see that she was thinking, actually thinking, not performing the motion of thought, but genuinely working something out. It was an interesting thing to watch. Most people looked like they were thinking when they were just reacting. She looked like she was thinking when she was actually thinking. The Hayes Protocol, she said slowly, almost to herself. Logan looked at her. What? She shook her head slightly. Nothing. She stopped. Can I ask you something directly? You've been asking me things directly for the last 10 minutes. This is more direct. Go ahead. She looked at him with the particular quality of someone who is measuring the distance between a thought and a decision and is almost ready to cross it. Is this what you want? Cleaning floors at Meridian? The room was very quiet. Somewhere, outside the glass doors, the Alara's engine had been shut off. The sudden absence of that sound made the silence in the client wing feel complete. Emma was looking at her macaron. Logan thought about the question. He didn't rush it because he didn't want to give her a quick answer, and because the honest answer wasn't quick. It had layers, the way honest answers usually do. It's what I chose, he said. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed. It's not. Do you miss it? The pause before his answer was the longest one yet. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because knowing it and saying it were different activities, and he hadn't had occasion to say it out loud in a very long time. Every time I see a car I don't recognize, he said, Every time I hear something in an engine that nobody else notices. Every time I watch a technician spend an hour with a laptop doing what their hands could tell them in 5 minutes. He paused. Yeah, I miss it. Victoria nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that Logan hadn't expected. I need someone who does what you did today. What you did today specifically. Not the fix, but the thing before the fix. Watching, remembering, knowing what everyone else in the room forgot to look for. Logan looked at her carefully. You have 100 technicians. I have 100 technicians who trust their laptops more than their instincts, who look at data before they look at the car. She shook her head slightly. The engineer from the manufacturer, he knew the inertia switch existed. It was in his own vehicle's specification. He just didn't think of it because the computers were showing him something else to look at. She met Logan's eyes. You weren't looking at the computers. I don't have access to the computers, Logan said, with a slight flatness that wasn't quite irony. I'm aware of that, Victoria said. She said it carefully, without flinching from it. I'm also aware of what that says about who Meridian has been paying attention to. She sat back. I have a private fleet. 14 vehicles currently, adding 3 more in the next 6 months. Performance cars, some vintage, some current spec hypercar inventory. I have a technical manager. Had one, I should say. He took a position with a manufacturer team last month and I haven't replaced him. Logan felt something move in him. He kept his face neutral, which required some effort because the thing that was moving in him was complicated. Equal parts something warm and something cautious, and he wasn't sure which one was the appropriate response to what he was hearing. Technical director, Victoria said, for the fleet. Overseeing maintenance, driving development decisions, working directly with me on acquisitions. I don't buy a car without having someone I trust look at it first. She paused. And apparently the person I trust hasn't been introduced to me yet. Emma made a small sound. Logan glanced at her. She was looking at the table, at her macaron, with an expression of elaborate casualness that he recognized as her trying very hard not to react to something. That's a significant offer, Logan said. It's meant to be. I don't know your full operation. I don't know your current technical team, your maintenance protocols, what relationships you have with manufacturers. You could learn, Victoria said. You clearly don't have trouble learning things. I'd need to know what the position actually looks like on a day-to-day level, not the title, the actual work. Then I'd like to show you, if you're willing to come and see it. She said this simply, without pressure, which was itself a kind of pressure. The particular pressure of someone offering something substantial with an ease that suggested they weren't worried about the answer. Logan was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Emma, who was now eating the macaron with the focused attention of someone who has definitely been listening but has decided that she is going to let this play out without commentary for at least another 30 seconds. There are conditions, Logan said. Tell me. Emma's school schedule is non-negotiable. I leave when she needs me to leave. I'm available by phone always, but physically, if she needs me, I go. Agreed, Victoria said without hesitation, and without any of the measured pause that would have suggested she was calculating whether it was workable. Just agreed, like she'd already thought about it. Logan studied her. That was fast. I run 3 companies, she said. I have employees with children. I've spent a lot of time being clear that availability and location are not the same thing as commitment and quality. I figured that out the hard way. She said it briefly, without elaboration, in a tone that suggested there was a longer story behind it, that she wasn't offering right now. What else? I'm not interested in a title that sits on paper and doesn't have actual authority. If I'm responsible for the technical condition of your fleet, I have final say on maintenance decisions, not advisory input. Final say. Victoria tilted her head slightly. That means if you tell me a car isn't ready to drive, I don't drive it. Correct. What if I disagree with your assessment? Then I'll show you why I'm right, and if I can't, I'll defer. He met her eyes. But that's never happened. In 13 years of racing, I've never made a call I couldn't defend. A pause. What if you're wrong? She said. Not challenging, genuinely curious. Then I'll tell you I was wrong, and we'll figure out what I missed, and I won't make that mistake again. He said it flatly, without drama. I'm not infallible. I just don't pretend to be. Victoria looked at him for a long time. He held the look without shifting. Okay, she said. Final say on technical decisions. What else? Office has to be accessible, he said. No fixed commute that puts me on a highway during school pickup hours. And I want to see the team I'd be working with before I commit. I don't walk into a structure I can't see. I'll arrange a visit this week if you're willing. She paused. Anything else? Logan thought. Yeah, he said. One more thing. She waited. Whatever I'm paid now, he said, it's not a lot. So I need you to be straightforward with me about the number. I don't do well with offers that turn out to be different from what was described. Victoria nodded. She named a figure. Logan was quiet for a moment. Emma dropped her macaron. She picked it up immediately, looked at it, set it deliberately on the plate, and resumed the expression of someone who was absolutely not listening. Logan looked at his daughter, then back at Victoria. That's... He stopped. It's market rate for the position, Victoria said, with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone for whom the number was simply accurate and nothing more. Possibly below market, if I'm being honest, given what we'd be asking of you. It's... Logan searched for the word. It's a different world from what I'm currently in. Yes, Victoria said simply. It is. He sat with that for a moment. He sat with the whole shape of the conversation, the question she'd asked him, the answer he'd given, the offer that had come from it, the number she'd named. He sat with the weight of it, which was considerable, and with the fact that he hadn't expected any of it when he woke up at 4:47 that morning in his small apartment with the water-stained ceiling. He thought about Bahrain, about the car that died on the warm-up lap, and the 90 minutes they'd spent looking in the wrong place, and the championship that slipped away while he stood by the pit wall watching it go. He thought about standing at the edge of the bay that afternoon, with the spray bottle in his hand and the rag on his belt, deciding whether to say something. He thought about his daughter, who was sitting next to him, and who had told him that knowing the answer and being scared to say it wasn't complicated, it was just scared. Give me until the end of the week, he said. Victoria nodded. She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and produced a card, a physical card, thick stock, minimal design, just her name and a number, and held it out. Logan took it. Thank you, he said. He meant it, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was thanking her for. The offer, or the question she'd asked before it, or the way she'd listened to the answer. Victoria stood. She looked at Emma, who straightened instinctively and then clearly resented that she'd done it. It was very nice to meet you, Victoria said, with a directness that did not condescend. Emma regarded her for a moment. Your car sounds really loud when it starts, she said. It does, Victoria agreed. Dad says the way a car sounds tells you a lot about it. Victoria looked at Logan. Your dad is right about that. Emma picked her macaron back up. I know, she said. Victoria smiled, a real one this time, brief and genuine, and walked back through the glass doors toward the main bay. Logan sat in the client wing of Meridian Motorworks with his daughter beside him and a business card in his hand, and the room was quiet enough that he could hear the climate control running and the distant voices of the technical team doing something procedural with the Alara and the very soft sound of Emma eating a macaron. He turned the card over in his fingers. Dad, Emma said without looking at him. Yeah. You should do it. He looked at her. She was looking at the macaron. You don't know what it involves yet, he said. I know you've been sad, she said. The way she said it was direct and unhurried and completely without cruelty, in the manner of a 10-year-old who doesn't yet know that some things are supposed to be said carefully. Not all the time, but sometimes when you think I'm not looking. The kind of sad that's quiet. She finally looked at him. I think you stopped doing something you loved because of me, and I don't think you should have. Logan's throat tightened. He kept his face steady. You didn't make me stop anything, he said. I know, but I'm why you didn't start again. She looked back at the macaron. I'm older now, Dad. I'm fine. I'm good at being fine. He looked at his daughter for a long time. You're not supposed to be the adult in this conversation, he said. I'm not, she said. I'm just... She thought about it. An interested party. He laughed. It came out unexpected. A real laugh, the kind that arrives before you've decided to let it. He pressed his hand over his mouth for a second, then let it go. Emma grinned at him. I've been saving that phrase, she said. Rhonda used it last week and I've been waiting for the right moment. Logan shook his head slowly. He looked down at the card in his hand. The clean, minimal design, the single phone number, Victoria Sterling's name in plain print. He thought about the inertia switch, small and mechanical and invisible behind the access panel, the thing that had cut the power and left a beautiful machine sitting silent while everyone looked in the wrong direction. He thought about how something so small could stop something so capable. And he thought, sitting there quietly, that maybe that was the right metaphor. Maybe he'd been the one sitting with a switch that needed resetting. He put the card in his shirt pocket. He stood up. "You want to get dinner?" he said. Emma slid off the couch. She zipped her bag. "Can we get Thai food?" "Yeah." "The place with the good noodles? Is there another place?" She considered this seriously. "No," she said. "There really isn't." They walked out of the client wing, through the main lobby, past Rhonda's empty desk. She'd gone home for the evening, the lights in the front office turned down low, and out into the parking lot, where the evening air had cooled and the last light was going orange over the building's flat roof. Logan looked back at the garage once. Through the high windows, he could see the glow of the technical bay and the shapes of people still working, the long winding down of a very long day, the putting away of equipment, the closing of laptops, the returning of tools to their places. Somewhere in there, the Alara X7 sat in its bay, running now, fixed, alive. He turned away. He walked to his car, a 7-year-old sedan with a small dent in the rear bumper and a Pine air freshener that Emma hated and that he kept purely out of stubbornness. And he unlocked it, and Emma got in the passenger side, and he sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. "Dad," Emma said. "Yeah." "What's the Thai place called again? I always forget." "Lotus Garden." "That's a weird name for a Thai restaurant." "The noodles are still good." "Fair point," she said. He started the car. He pulled out of the Meridian lot and onto Callaway Street, and the city moved past the windows the way it always did. The evening traffic, the lit storefronts, the ordinary texture of a Thursday in a city that didn't know anything had shifted today. In his shirt pocket, the card sat against his chest, light as paper, heavy as everything it meant. He drove. The card sat on Logan's kitchen counter for 3 days. Not because he'd forgotten it was there. He was aware of it every morning when he made his bad coffee, and every evening when he came home and set his keys next to it, and at least twice in the middle of the night when he couldn't sleep and walked to the kitchen for water and stood in the dark looking at it like it was something that needed to be watched. It was a small rectangle of thick paper with a name and a number on it, and it had taken up more space in his apartment than anything that small had a right to. On the second morning, Emma moved it slightly so she could set her cereal bowl down, and then moved it back to approximately where it had been, which told him she was thinking about it too, and that she had decided, with the particular tact of a 10-year-old who had already said what she wanted to say, not to mention it again. He appreciated that about her. On Thursday evening, after Emma was in bed and the apartment had gone quiet, Logan sat at the folding table with the broken leg and opened his laptop and spent 2 hours reading about Victoria Sterling. Not the social media version of her, not the profile pieces that led with her age and her net worth and used words like visionary and disruptive. Those told him almost nothing useful. He read the technical interviews, the ones she'd done for engineering publications, for software development forums, for one long recorded conversation with a motorsport technology podcast that had somehow gotten access to her 3 years ago. He read her company's technical documentation on the battery management system she'd co-developed. He read the forum threads where engineers who worked adjacent to her field argued about her approach, some admiring, some skeptical, all of them clearly taking her seriously. She was, he concluded, exactly as intelligent as she appeared, which was unusual. A lot of people who appeared that intelligent turned out to be performing a version of it. She seemed like the real thing, someone who actually understood the system she worked with, who had built something rather than funded something, who had a genuine technical instinct underneath the business structure. He also found a 2-sentence mention in a motorsport industry newsletter from 4 years ago. Sterling Dynamics has acquired a private collection of performance and legacy vehicles for internal R&D use. The fleet, currently housed at an undisclosed facility outside the city, is understood to include several current-generation hypercars, as well as historically significant endurance racing vehicles. Historically significant endurance racing vehicles. Logan sat with that for a moment. He closed the laptop. He went to bed. He lay in the dark for 40 minutes, then got up and called the number on the card. It was 11:30 at night. Victoria picked up on the second ring. "I wasn't sure you'd call," she said. No preamble, no surprised reaction to the hour, as if she'd been expecting this and had simply not known when. "I wasn't sure either," Logan said. He was standing in the kitchen in his socks, the counter cold under his hand. "I want to see the facility." "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll send a car at 10. I have to be back by 3:15. I know, Emma's school." There was a brief pause. I looked up the schedule for Westfield Elementary. 3:15 is the pickup bell. Logan was quiet for a moment. "You looked up my daughter's school schedule." "I'm thorough," Victoria said. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't entirely comfortable either. There was something in her voice that acknowledged the line without quite admitting she'd crossed it. "Is that a problem?" He thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet," he said. "Fair enough." A pause. 10 o'clock. The car will be a black sedan. The driver's name is Carl. He talks a lot, but he means well. "Okay." "Logan." "Yeah. I'm glad you called," she said. Just that simply, without the professional gloss that covered most of what people said when they were doing business. She said it the way a person says something they mean. He said goodnight. He hung up. He stood in the kitchen for another minute, looking at the spot where the card had been, because Emma had put it in the drawer next to the silverware at some point that evening, filing it away with the quiet efficiency of a person who considered the matter decided. He went back to bed. He almost slept. The car that arrived at 10 the next morning was not the understated black sedan he'd imagined. It was a black sedan, technically, but it was the kind that belonged to a different tax bracket. Long, quiet, with the particular hush of a vehicle that has been engineered to make the outside world irrelevant. Carl was in the front seat, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-50s with a short beard, and the specific friendliness of someone who has spent years in a role that requires them to be pleasant to strangers and has genuinely come to enjoy it. "You're Logan," Carl said as Logan got in. "Yeah." "Good. I was worried they sent me to the wrong address. This neighborhood—" He stopped himself, apparently deciding mid-sentence that completing that thought would be impolite. "Nice morning, though. Really clear." "It is," Logan said. "You know, I drove Ms. Sterling to a race 3 years ago. Endurance race. Out in the desert, about 200 miles east. She spent the whole drive reading technical documents. I asked her once what she was reading, and she explained the entire thing to me for 45 minutes. I didn't understand most of it." He checked his mirror and pulled smoothly into traffic. "But she explained it like it was interesting. That's the thing about her. She explains things like they matter, even if you don't already know they matter." Logan looked out the window at the city moving past. "How long have you worked for her?" 6 years, Carl said. "Since before the second company, back when it was still just the first one, and there were maybe 30 people total." He paused. "She remembered my wife's name from the first time I mentioned it. 6 years later, she still asks about her by name." He said it plainly, without sentiment, just as a fact he'd decided was worth conveying. "That's the kind of thing you notice." Logan said nothing. He watched the city give way to the older industrial outskirts, the part of the metropolitan area where the buildings got lower and farther apart, where the roads widened, where the signage became more utilitarian. They drove for 35 minutes. The facility was not what he'd expected. He wasn't entirely sure what he'd expected. Something sleek and modern and aggressively branded, maybe. The architectural equivalent of what Meridian Motorworks tried to be. What he found instead was a converted airfield building, a long, wide structure with a curved metal roof that had probably hangared small aircraft 40 years ago and had been so thoroughly rebuilt since then that the aircraft history was just a rumor in the proportions. The surrounding property was enclosed, good fencing, discreetly done, and from the road you could see very little of what was inside. Carl punched a code at the gate. The gate opened. They drove in. Victoria was standing outside the main entrance when the car pulled up. She was dressed more practically than she'd been at Meridian. Darker jeans, boots with actual tread on them, a jacket that was built for warmth rather than appearances. She had a coffee in her hand, and she was looking at something on her phone, and she looked up when the car stopped. She didn't try to look like she hadn't been waiting. "Good morning," she said, as Logan got out. "Morning," he said. She looked at him with that same direct quality, like she was measuring something, but without hostility in the measurement. "How do you take your coffee?" "Black." She nodded, like this confirmed something. "Come in." The inside of the facility opened up in a way that the exterior didn't suggest. The floor plan was large, genuinely large, the kind of space that took a moment for the eye to process. The floors were sealed concrete, clean, but not performatively clean, the kind of clean that came from people who cared about their work rather than their image. The lighting was high and even, industrial fixtures updated with better technology, but not concealed or softened. And along the walls, in bays that were separated by low equipment stations, were the cars. Logan stopped walking. He stood just inside the main entrance and he looked at them. There were 14 of them, as she'd said, but knowing a number and seeing what that number meant were different experiences. He saw a current generation hypercar from a Swiss manufacturer that had a 4-year waiting list. He saw a vintage Le Mans prototype from the early 2000s that he recognized immediately by its proportions, by the particular way it had been built low and aggressive at the front end. He saw 2 modern endurance racers that appeared to be in various stages of maintenance work. He saw a flat plane crank V8 sports car from the previous decade that had been the subject of 3 magazine cover stories and 1 documentary he'd watched twice. And in the far bay, partly obscured by a rolling parts cabinet, he saw something he didn't expect. He walked toward it without fully deciding to. His feet just took him there, the way you walk toward a sound before you've identified what it is. It was a Crescent racing car. Not a current one, a previous generation, from the consortium's early years before Logan's time there, but recognizable. The livery was different, repainted in a deep green, but the underlying architecture was unmistakable to someone who had spent years with his hands inside that design's successor. He stood in front of it. "That came from an estate auction 2 years ago," Victoria said from behind him. She'd followed at a distance, letting him move at his own pace through the space. The original owner was a collector who had purchased it directly from the team when they retired the chassis. It's mechanically complete. The engine is original. Logan crouched down beside the front wheel arch. He could see from this angle the geometry of the suspension, the way it had been set up, the adjustments that had been made at some point by someone who knew what they were doing. "It needs work," he said. "I know." The front suspension geometry is off. Not dangerously, but whoever adjusted it last either didn't know this chassis's alignment specifications or was working with incorrect data. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "The technical manager I mentioned, the one who left last month. He worked on it about 6 weeks before he got the manufacturer offer." Logan stood up. He looked at the car for another moment. Then he turned around. The facility's interior, from this angle, showed him more. He could see the equipment layout, where the diagnostic stations were positioned, how the tool storage was organized, which bays had overhead hoists and which didn't. He could see the workflow logic, or the absence of it. He could see 2 areas where the organization had clearly evolved over time without being redesigned, which meant there were inefficiencies built into the spatial logic that nobody had stopped to fix because they'd simply gotten used to them. He could see a lot of things. "Tell me about the team," he said. Victoria handed him the coffee she'd been holding, his apparently prepared ahead of time. He took it without thinking. She pulled her phone from her pocket and leaned against the nearby parts cabinet with the ease of someone who has held conversations in garages before. 8 people currently, she said. 4 full-time technicians, 2 part-time specialists I bring in for specific jobs, a logistics coordinator named Diana, who handles everything that isn't the cars, and a shop manager named Patrick, who has been here since the beginning and knows where everything is and is deeply resistant to change. How resistant? He still uses a paper parts ledger, by choice, in the year we are currently living in. Does the paper ledger work? Victoria paused. Yes, which is why I haven't pushed it. Then it's not resistance, Logan said. It's a system that functions. It just looks old. She looked at him. That's a generous interpretation. It's an accurate one. He drank the coffee. It was good, properly made, the kind of attention that most people didn't give to something as ordinary as a cup of coffee. He noticed this without commenting on it. What happened with the last technical manager, the one who left? Victoria's expression shifted slightly, a small tightening that she controlled quickly but not quickly enough. He was talented, she said. Good instincts with the modern inventory. Less comfortable with the vintage cars. She paused. He was also, she seemed to choose the next word with care, political. In the way that people are political when they're building a resume rather than doing a job. The manufacturer offer came along, and he'd been angling for something like it from the first month. Did you know that when you hired him? I suspected it, she said. I hired him anyway because I needed someone, and he was the most qualified candidate. A pause. That was my mistake. Logan appreciated that she said it that simply. No reframing, no justification, no elaborate explanation of the circumstances. Just, that was my mistake. He'd worked with people who couldn't do that. It was more common than it should have been. Can I meet the team? He said. The team was gathered in the small break room attached to the main bay. 4 technicians, Diana the logistics coordinator, and Patrick, who turned out to be 61 years old with silver gray hair cut close to his head, reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, and the physical presence of someone who had spent decades working with his hands and had the posture to prove it. Patrick was the one Logan watched most carefully during the brief introductions. He had the quality, Logan recognized it immediately, of someone who has been in a place long enough that their identity is partially formed by it, who has developed the particular territorial instinct of the person who knows where everything is and what everything means. He would be, Logan assessed, either an invaluable resource or a significant obstacle, depending almost entirely on whether he felt respected. He shook Logan's hand with the firm grip of a man who uses handshakes as assessment tools. He held it a second longer than necessary and looked directly at him. I've been here 4 years, Patrick said. Before Ms. Sterling, I worked at a restoration shop for 18 years. Before that, a manufacturer team for 6. He said it without preamble, the way you lay your credentials on the table at the beginning of a negotiation. What's your background? Logan told him, briefly, in the same plain style he'd used with Victoria. Patrick listened. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes did something, a slight sharpening, the way a person's eyes sharpen when they hear something that requires them to update a category. Crescent Racing, Patrick said. Yeah. Le Mans 6 years ago. Yeah. Patrick looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Victoria, and then back at Logan. The suspension on the Crescent car in Bay 7, he said. The previous technical manager said it was within spec. It isn't, Logan said. Patrick made a small sound that contained a significant amount of compressed opinion. I told him that, he said. I believe you, Logan said. Another moment. Patrick's expression hadn't exactly warmed, but something in it had settled, the way a room settles when a sound you've been unconsciously braced against finally stops. You want a tour? Patrick said. Yeah, Logan said. I do. Patrick gave him the tour. It took 1 hour and 40 minutes, which was longer than necessary if the goal was just to show him the space. But Patrick wasn't just showing him the space. He was telling him the history of it. Which car had been brought in with what condition, which repairs had been straightforward, and which had required solutions that weren't in any manual, which equipment had been requested and denied and by whom, where the workflow got tangled, where it ran clean. Logan asked questions. Real ones, not polite questions designed to demonstrate engagement, but the specific functional questions of someone trying to understand a system. Patrick answered them with the increasing fluency of a person discovering that the questions being asked were the right ones. At one point, they were standing in front of the Swiss Hypercar, and Patrick was explaining a recurring issue with its active aerodynamics calibration, and Logan asked 3 questions in sequence that progressively narrowed toward the source of the problem, and Patrick stopped mid-sentence and looked at him. You already know what the problem is, Patrick said. I have a theory, Logan said. What is it? The calibration software and the mechanical actuators aren't talking at the same refresh rate. The software thinks it's sending corrections faster than the hardware can implement them. You'll see it as a lag in the system's response under high load conditions. Looks like a calibration issue, but it's actually a communication protocol mismatch. Patrick stared at him. I suggested that 6 months ago, Patrick said, with a controlled flatness that barely contained what was underneath it. I was told it was a user error. Logan looked at the car. It wasn't. No, Patrick said, it wasn't. They stood there for a moment in the shared understanding of two people who have both been on the wrong side of being dismissed. You'd need to check the manufacturer's communication specifications for both the software version and the actuator generation, Logan said. If there's a mismatch, there's probably a firmware update available that addresses it. If there isn't, you'd need to adjust the software polling rate manually. It can be done, but it requires direct access to the calibration system and manufacturer approval. I know how to do it, Patrick said. I just need someone to authorize the diagnostic access. Is that something that would go through the technical director? Patrick looked at him. A long look. Yeah, he said. It would. They finished the tour. Victoria was waiting near the main entrance when they came back. She'd been occupied with something else during the hour and 40 minutes, visible through the glass office at the far end of the facility, on a call that appeared to involve a lot of looking at documents spread across a table. She looked up when Logan and Patrick came back. Patrick went back to what he'd been doing without ceremony. But as he walked past Victoria, he said, without stopping or looking at her, he knows what the problem is with the 7 cars' aerodynamics. Victoria watched him go. Then she looked at Logan. Is that good? She said. Patrick's hard to impress, Logan said. I know. That's why I'm asking. Logan looked around the facility one more time. He took it in deliberately. The layout, the equipment, the cars in their bays, the particular texture of a place that had been built with genuine care, but that had also developed the particular asymmetries that come from growth without consistent direction. He thought about what it would mean to step back into this world. Not the racing world. He wasn't naive enough to think this was the same thing, and he wasn't sure he wanted it to be. But the world of understanding cars deeply, of being responsible for machines that operated at the edge of what engineering could produce, of using the knowledge that lived in his hands and his memory for something that actually required it. He thought about Meridian, about the floors he'd mopped that morning, the third one before Carl arrived, doing the South Corridor because it was on his schedule, even though his mind had been entirely elsewhere. He thought about Emma, about what she'd said. I think you stopped doing something you loved because of me. About the particular precision of a child's observation, the way children sometimes saw the things adults had learned to look past. He thought about the Crescent car in Bay 7 and the misaligned suspension that someone had missed, and the way his eyes had gone straight to it. I need to ask you something, he said. Victoria waited. If I take this position, he said, and I find problems that need fixing, structural problems, not just mechanical ones, problems with how the operation runs, how decisions get made, how the team is organized. Am I going to be able to address those things, or am I going to be told those aren't part of my role? Victoria considered this. Define structural. The workflow in the main bay has 3 bottlenecks that don't need to exist. The equipment placement in the northeast section means that 2 of the technicians are working with less than half the access they should have. The diagnostic stations are positioned for convenience rather than logic. And whatever system is currently being used to prioritize maintenance scheduling, if there is one, needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. He paused. That's not technical management. That's operational management. Some people would say it's overstepping. Victoria looked at him steadily. Are you asking me for permission to fix things that are broken? I'm asking you whether you want someone who fixes what's broken or someone who manages what's assigned. She didn't answer immediately. She looked at the facility, the same space he'd been looking at, but she looked at it differently, the way the owner of a thing looks at something they've been responsible for long enough that they've stopped fully seeing it. When I started my first company, she said, I hired a COO at 18 months in, experienced person, strong resume, came with excellent references. He spent the first 3 months organizing things that didn't need organizing and avoiding things that did. When I brought it up, he said he wanted to stay in his lane. She paused. I let him go at the 6-month mark. It cost me more than the hiring process had. She looked back at Logan. I would rather have someone who sees what's broken and has an opinion about it than someone who stays in their lane and lets things stay broken. Fix what you find. Logan nodded. Okay. Okay, you'll take the position? Or okay, you heard what I said? Both, he said. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in her expression, not dramatically, just the small, specific settling of someone who has been carrying a problem and has just been told it's handled. Not relief. Something quieter than relief. The look of a decision that has resolved. "I want you to start in 2 weeks," she said. "That gives me time to handle the formal paperwork and gives you time to—" She paused. "To do whatever you need to do." "I need to give Meridian notice," he said. "Of course. And I need to tell Emma." "You think she'll be surprised?" Logan thought about the card in the silverware drawer, about the way Emma had filed it there with the quiet certainty of someone who had already made a decision on his behalf and was waiting for him to catch up. "No," he said. "I don't think she'll be surprised." He left the facility at 1:45, which gave him time to get back across the city for the school pickup. Carl drove with the same pleasant, unhurried ease as the morning, and this time didn't talk as much. Perhaps he'd gauged something in Logan's demeanor that suggested this particular passenger needed the quiet. Logan looked out the window at the city moving past in the afternoon light. He felt something that he didn't have a clean name for. Not quite excitement, not quite fear, something that sat in the space between the two and drew from both of them. He'd felt it before, once. A long time ago, standing at the edge of a pit lane for the first time, looking at a car that was about to go faster than anything he'd been close to and knowing that he was responsible for it. The feeling of standing at the beginning of something real. He called Meridian from the back seat and asked for his supervisor. He was on hold for 4 minutes. He could hear the ambient noise of the facility in the background, the faint sound of a car being worked on, someone's radio. And then his supervisor came on. The conversation was short. His supervisor asked if it was another job. Logan said yes. The supervisor was quiet for a moment and then said, with the pragmatic absence of hard feelings that characterized most of their interactions, that he appreciated the 4 years and that Logan should come in Monday to sort out the formalities. He hung up. Carl had found something classical on the radio, low, unobtrusive strings, and the city continued to move past the windows, and Logan sat in the back of a car that cost more than his current annual salary and felt the familiar shape of a chapter ending and couldn't quite tell yet whether what came next was going to be better or just different. He was at Westfield Elementary at 3:12. Emma came out at 3:17, which was 2 minutes after the bell, because she always stopped to put her book away properly before she left the classroom, a habit Logan had never been able to entirely account for. She saw the car first. Then she saw Logan standing beside it, which was unusual enough that she slowed down and looked at him with the specific alert attention she deployed when something was different. "That's not our car," she said, stopping in front of him. "It belongs to my employer's driver," Logan said. Emma looked at the car, then at Logan. Something moved across her face, a quick thing, there and gone, a flash of something that was either relief or something closely related to it. "So you said yes," she said. "I said yes." She nodded. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. She looked at the car again and then back at him. "Is Carl going to drive us home?" "If that's okay with you." "Yeah," she said. She started toward the car, then stopped and turned back. "Does the new place have better cookies than Meridian?" "I didn't see any cookies," Logan said. Emma made a face. "But the coffee was good," he offered. "I'm 10, Dad." "Right," he said. "Sorry." She got in the car. Logan stood on the sidewalk outside Westfield Elementary for a moment, in the afternoon light, with the sound of the school day ending around him, kids and parents and bicycles, and the particular controlled chaos of 3:15, and he put his hands in his pockets and felt the shape of what had just happened settle into something more concrete than it had been that morning. He got in the car. Carl looked at him in the rearview mirror. "Good day?" "Yeah," Logan said. "Actually, yeah." "Good," Carl said, with the uncomplicated satisfaction of someone who asks questions they actually want answered. He pulled away from the curb and into traffic. "You want music, or—" "Whatever you have on is fine," Logan said. The strings came back on. Emma sat beside Logan and looked out of her window at the city, and after a few minutes she leaned slightly against his arm without doing it, obviously, in the way she sometimes did when she didn't want to make a thing of needing to be close to someone. He didn't move. He looked out his own window. The city kept going, the way cities do. And somewhere across town, in a converted airfield building behind good fencing, 14 extraordinary cars sat in their bays waiting for someone who understood them to come back. He showed up 12 minutes early, not because Victoria had told him to, and not because he was trying to make an impression. He'd simply woken up at 4:47 the way he always did, made his coffee, checked on Emma, who was still asleep with one arm hanging off the side of her bed and her book open on the pillow beside her, and then had nothing particular to do with the hour between getting dressed and needing to leave, except sit at the folding table and feel the specific quality of nervous energy that he hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't fear exactly. It was closer to the feeling of standing at the edge of a diving board, not afraid of the water, but aware of the air between here and there and what it would feel like to move through it. He'd ironed his shirt the night before. He didn't own many clothes that required ironing. His work wardrobe for the past 4 years had been the kind that went straight from the dryer to the closet, and the iron itself had taken him 5 minutes to find, buried in the back of the hall closet behind Emma's winter coat and a bag of things he'd been meaning to donate for 2 years. He'd done a passable job. Not perfect. There was a crease along the left shoulder that he couldn't fix without making it worse, and he decided at some point that the crease was not the thing that mattered. Emma had come out of her room that morning, looked at him standing at the counter in his ironed shirt, and said, "You look like you're going to a job interview." "I have a job," he said. "You look like you're nervous about it." "I'm fine." She poured herself cereal and sat down and looked at him over the rim of her bowl. "It's okay to be nervous," she said, with the careful delivery of someone offering information they expect to be rejected. "I know," he said. "Are you going to eat breakfast?" He looked at his coffee. He had not, it turned out, been planning to eat breakfast. "I'll get something on the way," he said. "Dad, I'll get something on the way." She sighed the sigh of someone managing a situation they've encountered before. She got up, opened the cabinet, and put a granola bar on the counter in front of him. He ate the granola bar. Carl picked him up at 8:15. The drive out to the facility was quiet, in a different way from the tour day. There was less of the exploratory quality to the silence, more of the settled-in kind, the silence of people who have already taken the measure of each other and found it sufficient. "First day," Carl said, somewhere around the 20-minute mark. "Yeah." "How are you feeling?" Logan thought about it honestly. "Like, I don't know what I don't know yet," he said. Carl nodded, like this was a reasonable response to the question. "That's the honest answer. Most people would say, 'Good, excited, ready to go.'" "I'm ready to go," Logan said. "I'm also aware that there are things I'm about to find out that I haven't found out yet." "That's what Ms. Sterling said when she started the second company," Carl said. "She told me we were driving to a board meeting and she'd been quiet for the whole trip. And she said, 'Carl, I know enough to know I don't know what I'm getting into, and I know I'll figure it out.' She was 26. He paused. "She figured it out." Logan looked out the window at the highway opening up ahead of them. "You like working for her," he said. "Not a question." "I do," Carl said. "She's not easy. She's demanding. She notices everything. She has high standards, and she doesn't apologize for them. But she's fair, and she's honest. When she tells you something, it's what she actually thinks." He paused again. "That's rarer than people realize." Logan thought about the conversation in the client wing, about the way she'd said that was my mistake without any of the careful linguistic maneuvering that people use to acknowledge errors without quite owning them. He thought about the way she'd answered his conditions, the speed of it, the absence of calculation. "Yeah," he said, "I'm getting that." They arrived at the facility at 8:48. The gate opened before Carl had fully stopped at the keypad. Someone had been watching the feed, and they drove in to find the main bay already active, the overhead lights on full, two of the technicians visible through the windows working on something in the second bay. Logan got out of the car. He stood in the morning air for a moment, looking at the building. The converted airfield roof, the wide entrance, the specific smell of the air near a working garage, oil and metal and something chemical that was part of the atmosphere of these places in the way that pine needles were part of the atmosphere of a forest. He went inside. Patrick was already there. Of course he was, but Patrick, Logan was learning, seemed to operate on the assumption that arriving after anyone else was a form of failure. He was standing at his paper ledger near the parts station, adding entries in handwriting that Logan had already identified as extremely precise for someone who claimed not to be meticulous. Patrick looked up when Logan came in. He looked at the ironed shirt. He looked at Logan's face. "Coffee's in the break room," he said. "Equipment manager's office is the second door on the left from the bay entrance. Previous technical manager left some documentation on the desk that may or may not be useful. I'd suggest reading it, but forming your own conclusions about the accuracy." "Why?" Logan said. Patrick's expression was entirely neutral. "Because some of his maintenance logs contain entries I'd describe as optimistic." Logan looked at him. "Optimistic how?" "In the sense that they describe completed work that I'm not confident was actually completed." A pause. "Which cars?" Logan said. "Start with bays 3 and 9, Patrick said, and went back to his ledger. Logan went to the office, got the documentation, and spent the first hour of his first day reading through the previous technical manager's logs with the focused attention of someone looking for the gap between what was written and what was true. The office was small and smelled like someone else's habits, the particular institutional smell of a space that had been occupied in the same way for too long. He opened the window. The documentation was thorough on paper, clean formatting, organized by date and vehicle, with detailed notes on each service performed. Logan read through 3 months of it before he found the first anomaly, a service entry for the Le Mans prototype in Bay 3 that noted a full brake system inspection and fluid replacement dated 11 weeks ago. He went to Bay 3. He spent 20 minutes looking at the Le Mans prototype, not with diagnostic equipment, just with his eyes and his hands, the two tools that had served him longer than any software. He checked the brake lines. He checked the reservoirs. He checked the calipers. Then he went back to the office and called Patrick in. Patrick stood in the doorway. "The brake fluid in the Bay 3 car," Logan said. "Yes," Patrick said. "When was it actually last changed?" Patrick looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of a man who already knows what he's going to say and is deciding how to frame it. "The last time I personally watched someone do it was approximately 8 months ago." "The log says 11 weeks. "The log," Patrick said, "says a lot of things." Logan put the documentation down on the desk. He sat back in the chair, which was slightly too low for the desk, another legacy of whoever had set this space up, and looked at Patrick. "How widespread is this?" "I don't know," Patrick said, and to his credit, he said it plainly, without trying to soften it or hedge it. "That's honest. I noticed discrepancies in a few entries, but I didn't have the authority to audit the logs formally. I flagged it to the previous technical director." A pause. "He told me the logs were accurate." "And you didn't go to Victoria?" Patrick was quiet for a moment. It was the specific quiet of someone deciding how honest to be. "I considered it," he said finally. "But I'd been here longer than he had, and I was worried it would look like—" He stopped. "Like I was making trouble because I didn't like him." "Did you not like him?" "That's not the point." "It kind of is," Logan said, not harshly, just accurately. Patrick looked at him with the expression of someone who has just been told something that they know is true and don't particularly enjoy knowing. "No," he said, "I didn't like him. He treated the team like variables in a schedule, and he talked about the cars like they were brand assets rather than machines that needed real maintenance." He paused. "But I also had genuine concerns about the logs." "Both things can be true," Logan said. "Yes," Patrick said. "They can." Logan stood up. "I'm going to spend today going through the physical condition of every car in this facility. Not the logs, the actual cars. I need you with me, and I need your honest assessment of everything you've observed, not the official version." Patrick studied him for a moment. "That's going to take all day." "Probably more," Logan said. "We'll get through as much as we can today. Ms. Sterling is going to need to know what we find." "She will," Logan said. "Whatever we find." Patrick nodded slowly like he was confirming something to himself rather than agreeing to a plan. "All right," he said, "start with Bay 9. What they found over the course of that day was not, in the end, catastrophic. It wasn't the kind of discovery that required everything to stop and the operation to be shut down. But it was the kind of discovery that mattered, the kind that, left unaddressed, moves from maintenance concern to operational risk to actual incident, and does so gradually enough that nobody sees it coming until it arrives. Bay 9 contained the Swiss Hypercar with the aerodynamics calibration issue. The calibration issue was real. Logan confirmed Patrick's diagnosis within 20 minutes of examination, but it was accompanied by something the logs hadn't mentioned, a slow hydraulic leak in the active suspension system that had been developing for, by Patrick's estimate, somewhere between 2 and 3 months. Not dangerous at low speeds. A problem at high speeds. A significant problem at the kind of speeds this car was designed to reach. Bay 3 had the brake system question, which resolved after a full physical inspection into something less alarming than it initially appeared. The fluid had been changed, but not 11 weeks ago. Closer to 5 months. Still within the service window, but not the window the log described. Bay 6 had an issue that neither of them had expected. The car in Bay 6 was a vintage endurance racer, 1990s, historically significant, the kind of vehicle that existed in the world in very limited numbers. And the issue was structural, subtle. The kind of thing you found by putting your hands on a car and feeling for the difference between what should be there and what was. A stress fracture in the chassis mounting point, probably the result of a transport incident at some point, possibly predating the vehicle's acquisition. Small. Currently stable. The kind of thing that required expert assessment before the car was moved again, let alone driven. Logan stood in front of the Bay 6 car for a long time. Patrick stood beside him. "That's a problem," Patrick said. "Yeah," Logan said. "How serious?" "Serious enough that she needs to know today," Logan said. "And serious enough that this car doesn't move until it's been properly assessed by someone who specializes in vintage chassis." Patrick nodded. "There's a restoration specialist outside the city. Man named Reverend Chen." "Does he go by that because he's actually—" "No, he's not a reverend. It's a nickname. 30 years in vintage restoration. Best chassis assessment work I've ever seen." He paused. "He's also extremely expensive and has a waiting list that's normally about 8 months long." "Get me his number," Logan said. He found Victoria in the glass office at the end of the facility at 2 in the afternoon, on the same call she always seemed to be on, or possibly many calls that blurred together into a continuous state of being on a call. She saw him through the glass and held up one finger. He waited outside the door. She was off the call within 4 minutes, which he suspected was faster than it would have been otherwise. She opened the office door. "How's the first day going?" "I need to talk to you," he said, "about what we found." Something in his tone must have registered because she didn't say anything further. She just stepped back from the door and let him in, and sat down on the edge of the desk in the posture of someone preparing to receive information they may not like. He told her, plainly, in order of severity, the Bay 6 chassis issue first, then the hydraulic leak in Bay 9, then the brake log discrepancy, then the range of smaller maintenance concerns they'd identified in 4 other vehicles. He didn't editorialize. He didn't contextualize it into something softer. He just told her what they found and what it meant. Victoria listened without interrupting. She sat on the edge of the desk with her arms crossed, not defensively, just the way she held herself when she was concentrating, and she listened to all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The Bay 6 car," she said. "The chassis fracture." "It's currently stable," Logan said, "but I want it assessed by a specialist before it's moved for any reason." Patrick mentioned someone. "Chen?" "He has a waiting list," Logan said. "I'd like to call him today and explain the situation. Sometimes a direct conversation about the nature of the issue can accelerate the timeline." Victoria looked at him. "You mean you can talk him into coming sooner?" "I mean, I can give him enough technical detail about what we found that he understands why the timeline matters." She considered this. "Do it," she said. "Whatever it costs, make it happen." Logan nodded. He started to stand. "Logan," she said. He stopped. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the focused assessment quality, not the listening quality, but something that sat underneath both of those. Something that was less composed than her usual register. "How bad is this?" she said. "Not about the cars." He understood that immediately. She wasn't asking about the cars. She was asking about the fact of it. The fact that her fleet had been in someone's care, and that care had been, in parts, inadequate, and that she hadn't known. He thought about how to answer honestly without being brutal about it. "It's manageable," he said. "Everything we found today is addressable. Nothing has resulted in an incident." He paused, but it needed to be found. And if you hadn't been here to find it, something would have found it eventually, he said, in worse circumstances. She absorbed this. She looked at the desk for a moment, then back at him. I should have caught this, she said. You're running 3 companies, he said. You can't be in here every day with your hands on the cars. I trusted someone to do that. Yes, Logan said. You did. He didn't add anything to it. He didn't tell her it wasn't her fault because he didn't know whose fault it was. And telling people things you don't know to be true in order to make them feel better was a habit he'd always found corrosive. She'd made a hiring decision that hadn't worked out. She knew it. He knew it. That was sufficient. What he did say, after a moment, was, "That's why you needed someone who wasn't building a resume." She looked at him for a moment. Then something in her face shifted. Not quite a smile, not quite relief, somewhere in between, the expression of someone who has recognized a truth in a way that costs something and also settles something at the same time. Yeah, she said. It is. He spent the rest of the afternoon on the phone with the specialist Chen, who did indeed have a waiting list, and who did indeed respond to a detailed technical description of a vintage chassis stress fracture with the focused attention of someone whose professional identity was intertwined with exactly this kind of problem. Logan described what he'd found with precise, specific language, the kind that could only come from someone who had actually looked at it and knew what they were talking about. Chen asked 4 questions. Logan answered them. I can be there Thursday, Chen said. Patrick, who had been listening from across the room, looked at Logan with an expression that was as close to impressed as Logan suspected his face was capable of getting. Thursday works, Logan said. By 5 o'clock, he had a written summary of the day's findings on his desk. Not a formal report, just his own notes, the kind he'd always kept in a working shorthand that made sense to him and that he'd learned over years to convert into language that made sense to other people when the situation required it. He had a priority list. He had a realistic timeline for addressing each issue. He had a call scheduled with a brake specialist for the following morning and a parts inquiry out to 2 suppliers. He also had a text from Emma. Are you picking me up or is Carl? He looked at his watch. 3:40. She'd have been out of school for 25 minutes. He texted back. Carl. I'm sorry, first day ran long. Did he find you? Yes. We're getting food. He says I can pick. Okay. I picked Ty. Of course you did. He's very nice. I know. He told me about the time Miss Sterling made him drive 4 hours to pick up a specific type of motor oil because she didn't trust shipping. That sounds about right. Is she always like that? Logan thought about Victoria sitting on the edge of the desk asking him how bad it was. Not with the practiced calm she showed the rest of the world, but with the real quality of someone who genuinely needed to know the honest answer. She's very serious about things that matter, he typed back. Yeah. Good, Emma replied. That's the right way to be. He put his phone in his pocket. He looked at his desk, the notes, the priority list, the physical space that was already starting to take on the particular texture of a place where work actually happened. He'd moved the desk 12 inches toward the window, which no one had commented on, but which changed the light enough to make a difference. He'd cleared a shelf and set up his reference manuals, 3 of them, actual physical books, the kind with dog-eared pages and margin notes in his own handwriting that he'd carried from job to job for 15 years. He put his jacket on and walked back through the main bay. The 2 technicians who'd been working in the second bay were still there. He'd gotten their names that morning and had filed them alongside what he'd observed about how they worked. Ramos, the younger one, was meticulous with equipment and fast with his hands, but had a tendency to skip the written documentation after a job, which was a fixable problem. Hendricks, the older one, documented everything and caught things other people missed, but had a stubborn attachment to the tools he was comfortable with and resisted equipment changes. Both of them had looked at Logan that morning with the careful neutrality of people who had learned not to commit to an opinion about a new manager before they knew what kind of manager they were dealing with. As Logan passed through the bay on his way out, Ramos was torquing something on the Le Mans prototype. Bay 3, brake system, the work Logan had assigned that afternoon to get ahead of the maintenance gap. How's it looking? Logan said, stopping beside the car. Ramos looked up. Fluid's done, he said. Lines are clean. Calipers are good. He paused, with the slight hesitation of someone deciding whether to add something. The previous system for tracking service intervals, the digital one we're supposed to be logging into, it's not reliable, Logan said. Ramos blinked. No, he said. There are gaps. I've been trying to keep my own notes. Keep them, Logan said, and send them to me. We're rebuilding the tracking system. I want your notes as a baseline. Ramos looked at him for a moment, the calibrating look, the one Logan had been getting from the team all day. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. Yeah. Logan continued toward the exit. As he passed the Bay 6 car, the vintage racer with the chassis issue, now with a cautionary marker placed on it by Patrick at some point in the afternoon, he stopped for a moment. He looked at it. The car was beautiful in the specific way that things made for a purpose are beautiful. Not decorative, not designed to be looked at, but shaped by the absolute requirement of function. Everything about it was the product of someone having decided that every unnecessary gram was gone and everything that remained was there because it had to be. He put his hand on the roof panel lightly, not to feel for anything specific, just to have his hand on it. The way you touch something you're responsible for, to remind yourself of the weight of that. He took his hand off. He went outside. The evening air had cooled again, late spring making its transition towards something warmer, the temperature dropping fast once the sun started going. He stood in front of the facility for a moment, the way he'd stood that morning, but it felt different now. The morning had been the edge of the diving board. This was the surface of the water. He'd been in it all day. It was different from what he remembered. That was the first honest thing he could say about it. It was different from the racing world, different in its pace and its structure and its pressures. But the core of it, the fundamental activity of understanding machines and being responsible for their condition, that part was identical. That part lived in the same part of him it had always lived in, and it had been there all day, awake and operational. And he'd spent the day realizing how much energy it had been costing him to keep it quiet. His phone buzzed. Carl, with a location, he and Emma were at the Thai restaurant, and Emma had apparently ordered his usual without asking him. He smiled at the phone. He started toward the car he'd been issued, one of Victoria's secondary fleet vehicles, a practical SUV that was considerably less dramatic than the cars he was now responsible for, but that had a good sound system and enough space in the back for Emma's sprawl of bags and books and whatever she'd accumulated during the school day. He was almost at it when he heard footsteps behind him. Logan. He turned. Victoria was standing outside the main entrance, jacket on now, her phone in her hand. She had the look of someone who has just finished a long day and is making peace with the length of it. Good first day? She said. He thought about the chassis fracture, about the hydraulic leak, about Patrick's paper ledger and Ramos's private notes, and the specific weight of a car under your hand when you know you're the one responsible for what happens to it. Productive, he said. She nodded. Patrick said you found things he'd been concerned about for months. He knew where to look, Logan said. He just needed someone to look with him. Victoria was quiet for a moment. The evening air moved around them, carrying the ambient sound of the surrounding area. Distant traffic. Somewhere a bird doing something energetic about the approaching dark. The chassis specialist on Thursday, she said. Chen, Logan said. He'll be here at 9. I want to be there. Logan looked at her. It's going to be technical, he said. Not as a warning, just as information. I understand chassis mechanics, she said, with a faint quality that might, on someone with a different baseline expression, have been described as slightly offended. I know, he said. I've read your technical documentation. He paused. I was going to suggest you be there. She looked at him for a moment, the same measuring quality she always had, but there was something else in it, something that, after a day of working in her facility and talking with her team and holding the physical responsibility of her fleet in his hands, he was starting to be able to read a little better. She was, he was learning, someone who had spent a long time being the person in the room who knew the most, and who had developed, as people in that position often do, a particular loneliness about it. Not self-pity, just the functional loneliness of someone who has fewer peers than they need. Chen at 9 on Thursday, she said. I'll be here by 8:30. I'll be here by 8, he said. She almost smiled. Of course you will, she said, and went back inside. Logan drove to the Thai restaurant on the west side of the city, where Carl and Emma were at a corner table and Emma had ordered the noodle dish he always got without asking, which was either thoughtful or presumptuous, depending on how you looked at it, and which he was choosing to call thoughtful. He sat down across from his daughter. She looked at him with her direct, assessing look, checking the temperature of the room the way she always did, the small, constant calibration of a kid who'd learned early to read adults. "You look better," she said. "Better than what?" "Better than this morning." She picked up her chopsticks. "Your shoulder's different." "My shoulder?" "You carry your shoulders up when you're stressed, like this." She demonstrated a subtle, involuntary tension across her upper back that was a startlingly accurate impression. "Today it's lower." He looked at her across the table. His daughter, who noticed things, who always had, who had gotten that quality from her mother and had refined it through years of watching a father navigate a life he'd made quieter than he'd meant to. "Yeah," he said. "It's lower." Carl raised his water glass from across the table. "To first days," he said. Emma picked up her glass. Logan picked up his. "To first days?" Emma said. Emma. They ate. The noodles were good, the way they always were. The specific good of a thing that doesn't try to be more than what it is and succeeds completely at what it is. The restaurant was full and warm and slightly too loud, and Emma got into a detailed conversation with Carl about a book she was reading that Carl admitted he'd seen the movie version of, and Emma explained with patient thoroughness everything the movie had gotten wrong. Logan ate his noodles and listened to his daughter explain the importance of internal character development to a man in his 50s who had watched the movie on an airplane and thought it was fine, and he felt the shape of the day settling into something he could carry. Not easy. He wasn't going to pretend it was easy. There was a long list of things to fix and a team he was still learning, and a fleet whose real condition he was only beginning to fully understand. There was a chassis specialist coming Thursday and a hydraulic system to address, and a tracking protocol to rebuild from the ground up. There was also this, a table in a Thai restaurant, and his daughter winning an argument with genuine evidence, and a first day that had been exactly as hard as it needed to be, and not harder. He ordered tea. He let Emma win the argument about the book. Outside, the city moved through its evening the way cities do, indifferent and continuous and full of its own momentum. And somewhere across town, in a converted airfield building with good fencing and 14 extraordinary machines in its bays, the work that Logan Hayes had walked away from 7 years ago sat waiting for him to come back to it. He was already on his way. Chen arrived at 8:53 on Thursday morning, which was 7 minutes early, which Logan took as a good sign. He was a compact man in his early 60s with close-cropped white hair and the particular physical quality of someone who had spent decades in confined spaces, crouched under cars, folded into engine bays, working in the narrow geometry of machines that weren't designed to accommodate the human body. He moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had long ago stopped making unnecessary motions. He carried a single worn canvas bag that looked like it had been to more countries than most people visit in a lifetime, and he shook Logan's hand with a grip that was firm without performing its firmness. "You're Hayes," Chen said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Logan said. "Thanks for coming early." "You described a stress fracture in a 1994 Kellerman chassis mounting point over the phone," Chen said. "I've been thinking about it since Tuesday." He looked around the facility with the particular attention of someone assessing a new environment for the first time. Not impressed, not dismissive, just taking accurate inventory. "Where is it?" Victoria was already inside. She'd arrived at 8:27, which was 3 minutes before Logan, which he suspected was deliberate. She was standing near the Bay 6 car when Logan led Chen through the main entrance, and she turned when they came in, and she and Chen exchanged the brief nod of two people who have heard of each other and are now confirming that the other person is real. "Miss Sterling," Chen said. "Mr. Chen," she said, "I appreciate you adjusting your schedule." "Logan gave me enough detail to make the decision easy," Chen said. He looked at the Bay 6 car, the 1994 Kellerman Endurance Racer, midnight green, low-slung, carrying its history in every panel and seam. He walked toward it without further conversation, and Logan walked with him, and Victoria followed 2 steps behind. And Patrick appeared from somewhere in the facility's middle distance and joined the group with the quiet of a person who has learned when to be present without being summoned. Chen set his bag down beside the car. He crouched, not at the wheel arch where Logan had found the fracture, but at the opposite corner, working from the other end of the chassis, building his own picture before consulting Logan's. Logan watched him and didn't say anything. This was the right way to do it. You didn't want to prime someone's assessment with your own before they'd formed theirs independently. That was how confirmation bias got built into the process, and confirmation bias in a chassis assessment was the kind of thing that got people hurt. Chen worked in silence for 11 minutes. He used two instruments from his canvas bag, a small optical tool that Logan didn't recognize by model but recognized by function, and a thin probe that he ran along certain seams with the particular sensitivity of touch that came from years of training your hands to feel what your eyes couldn't see. He moved around the car twice, stopping at specific points, and his face gave away almost nothing except the focused quiet of someone who was genuinely engaged with a problem. Finally, he stood up. He looked at Logan. "Left rear chassis mounting point," he said. "Yes," Logan said. "You found it by hand?" "By hand?" Chen nodded slowly, like this confirmed something. "The fracture is stress-related. You're correct about that. Not impact or not primarily impact. This developed over time under load. The car's been driven." He paused. "Hard." "Before acquisition?" Victoria said. "Before and possibly after," Chen said, with the careful qualification of someone who distinguished between what he knew and what he was inferring. "I can't tell you with certainty when the fracture initiated. What I can tell you is its current state." He turned back to the car and indicated a point on the chassis with two fingers. "Here. The fracture is through approximately 30% of the mounting cross-section. It's currently stable under static load, meaning it's holding the car's own weight without propagating. Under dynamic load, any significant movement, transport, and certainly driving, the stress distribution changes and the fracture will propagate." The bay was very quiet. "What does propagation mean in practical terms?" Victoria said. She asked it with the quality she had when she was genuinely seeking information rather than performing a question, direct, without softening it into something less alarming. "In practical terms," Chen said, "it means the mounting point fails. And when a rear chassis mounting point fails at speed, you lose structural integrity in the rear suspension geometry, which means you lose directional control." He said it plainly, without drama. "This car cannot be driven. It can barely be transported safely as it is." Victoria looked at the car for a moment. Logan watched her process this. The specific sequence of a person calculating not just what they're hearing, but what it means, what it would have meant, what the distance is between the current moment and a different version of it where this had gone undiscovered. "If we hadn't found this," she said, not to Chen, to Logan. "Eventually someone would have driven it," Logan said, "and eventually is not a good timeline for something like this." She nodded, a single, controlled nod. "Can it be repaired?" she said to Chen. "It can," Chen said. "It's a significant job. Vintage chassis repair at this level requires sourcing period-correct materials, custom fabrication of the affected section, and a full structural assessment before and after the repair. It will take time and it won't be cheap." He paused. "But yes, it can be brought back." "Then bring it back," Victoria said. "Whatever it takes." Chen looked at her. "You understand I'll need to take it to my facility. The work can't be done here." "When?" "I'd like to transport it Monday. I can have a suitable trailer arranged. The transport will need to be done at walking pace over smooth roads, with the chassis supported at multiple points. It's a delicate operation." "I'll handle the transport logistics," Logan said. "I want to be there for it." Chen looked at him. Something in the older man's face had shifted over the course of the morning. An initial reserve that had been giving way, gradually, to something warmer. Not friendship exactly, not yet, but the specific warmth between people who share a genuine fluency in the same language and have recognized it in each other. "I'll want you there," Chen said. "You found this by hand in a facility you'd been in for one day. I'd like another set of eyes on the transport." They spent another 2 hours going through the rest of the fleet together. Chen's assessment paired with Logan's findings from the first day. Patrick's institutional knowledge anchoring both. Victoria stayed for all of it. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She listened, and when she asked something, it was the right thing to ask. And Chen answered her with the respect he reserved for people who had earned the conversation they were trying to have. By the time Chen left at 11:30, with a full written assessment committed to email before his car had left the property, Logan had seen him typing on his phone while Patrick walked him to the gate. The morning had produced something more concrete than a list of findings. It had produced a direction. Logan knew what needed to be done. He had the order of it, the timeline, the resources required. He had Chen coming back Monday for the transport. He had the aerodynamics calibration fix scheduled for the following week, pending manufacturer approval for the software access, which Victoria had personally called to authorize that morning between Chen's arrival and his examination of the Bay 6 car. He had Ramos's private maintenance notes integrated into a new tracking structure that he'd spent Wednesday evening building, which replaced the previous system's optimistic gaps with something that reflected the actual physical state of each vehicle. He had, in the space of 3 days, rebuilt the foundation of how this fleet was cared for. It wasn't glamorous work. None of it was. It was the work of finding what was broken and fixing it, of building systems that would prevent the next break, of teaching a team to trust what their hands told them before they trusted what their screens told them. It was exactly the work that needed to be done, and Logan found, doing it, that the 4 years of quiet had not diminished his capacity for it. If anything, the years of invisibility had sharpened something in him, an attention to detail, a patience with the unglamorous parts of the process, a willingness to stay with a problem until it resolved rather than moving on when it became inconvenient. He thought about that sometimes in the weeks that followed, about what the 4 years had done to him versus what he'd thought they were doing to him. He'd believed in some quiet part of himself that he'd been erasing something, that the decision to step back from the world of racing and competition and prestige had been a kind of subtraction, that he'd traded a version of himself for a smaller, more manageable version. He'd told himself it was the right trade, and he'd meant it, and he'd made peace with it. But peace and accuracy are different things, and somewhere underneath the peace there had been the persistent, low-level ache of someone who had locked a room and kept telling themselves the room was fine. It wasn't fine. It was full of something that had nowhere to go. What he understood now, standing in a bay with his hands on a machine that needed what he knew, was that the 4 years hadn't subtracted anything. They just held it in reserve. The knowledge was still there. The instinct was still there. The specific quality of attention that made him see the speed bump, that made him feel the chassis fracture, that made him hear what was wrong in an engine before anyone else registered that anything was wrong. All of it's still there, unchanged, waiting with the patience of something that had no reason to leave. He just hadn't given it anywhere to go for a very long time. The Hayes Protocol came from Victoria. It happened 3 weeks into Logan's time at the facility, at the end of a team meeting that had covered the aerodynamics fix. Successful, implemented cleanly, with Ramos documenting every step in the new tracking system with a thoroughness that Logan suspected was slightly performative, but was no less useful for that. And the update on the Bay 6 transport, which had gone exactly as carefully as Logan and Chen had planned it, slow and deliberate along smooth roads at first light on a Monday morning. Victoria had been in the meeting. She came to most of them now, so not to manage, but to be present, which Logan had initially found mildly distracting and had come to understand as something different from what he first thought. She came because she was genuinely interested, because the work mattered to her in the specific way that things matter to people who built them rather than just owning them. At the end of the meeting, after the updates and the logistics, she had said, "I want to formalize something." The room had looked at her. "What Logan found in the first week," she said, "and what Chen confirmed, that's not just a maintenance failure, it's a process failure. We had a system that prioritized digital documentation over physical verification, and we got digital documentation that didn't reflect reality." She paused. "Going forward, I want a policy in place. Every car in this fleet, every service, every inspection, you check the physical reality of the car before you open a diagnostic tool. You look at it. You put your hands on it. You start with what the machine is actually telling you before you ask a computer to translate." Patrick, from his position at the corner of the room, made the small sound that Logan had come to recognize as his version of emphatic agreement. "What do we call it?" Ramos said. Victoria looked at Logan. Logan looked at the table for a moment. He felt something move through him. Not embarrassment, not quite, but the specific discomfort of someone who is being named in a way that changes the shape of how they're perceived, and who is still adjusting to being perceived at all. "You don't need to name it after me," he said. "I know I don't need to," Victoria said. He looked at her. She looked at him. "The Hayes Protocol," she said to the room. "That's what we're calling it. Every technician who joins this team gets told on their first day, check the fundamentals before you check the screen, and they get told where it came from and why." He didn't argue with her. He wasn't going to win that argument. What the Hayes Protocol actually was, in practice, was simpler than its name suggested. It was a two-step requirement built into the service checklist for every car in the fleet. A mandatory physical inspection logged before any digital diagnostic was initiated, with the inspector's name and a plain language description of physical condition required in the log alongside the automated data. That was it. Simple enough that it added maybe 15 minutes to an inspection. Significant enough that it meant every person who worked on these cars had to touch them, had to look at them with the kind of attention that produced real information before they reached for their laptop. Patrick implemented it without complaint. He had, Logan suspected, been waiting for something like it for years. The team received it the way teams receive things that make sense, without drama, without resistance, with the quiet adoption of people who recognize that the new way is better than the old way and have no strong attachment to defending the old way. What Logan hadn't expected was what happened with Meridian. It came through Victoria about 6 weeks after the protocol had been formalized, in the form of a phone call she took during lunch, and which she relayed to Logan afterward with the particular expression of someone delivering information they find amusing. "Marcus Webb called me," she said. Logan was eating a sandwich at his desk. He stopped mid-bite. "Marcus." He read about the protocol. Apparently it circulated through some industry channels. He wants to implement something similar at Meridian. She paused. He also asked, indirectly but not very subtly, whether I knew how you'd arrived at the approach. Logan thought about Marcus standing in the bay, looking at him with the patient condescension of someone explaining software failures to a janitor. "What did you tell him?" he said. "I told him the protocol was named after my technical director, and that I'd pass along his regards." She looked at him. "He seemed surprised that you had a title." Logan went back to his sandwich. "He would be," he said. There was a satisfaction in it that he didn't try to pretend wasn't there, not vindictive. He didn't wish Marcus anything bad, and Marcus was, at his core, a capable person who had built real expertise over years of real work. But there was something in the specific image of Marcus Webb calling to ask about an idea that had come from the man he'd dismissed as a janitor, that had a particular and irreducible justice to it. The kind you don't engineer. The kind that just happens when enough time passes and the world catches up with itself. He thought about this later, sitting in the facility's break room after most of the team had gone home for the day, with a mediocre cup of coffee. The facility's coffee was fine, not as good as he'd been hoping for based on that first cup Victoria had handed him, which had apparently been made by someone other than whoever made the break room coffee, and the quiet of a building that has been full of work all day and is now settling into its own silence. He thought about what it meant to be invisible. Not the forced invisibility of someone who had been overlooked by people who should have known better. Though that was part of it, but the chosen invisibility he'd constructed for himself. The deliberate smallness of a life pruned back to its essential relationships, its essential responsibilities. He'd told himself it was about Emma, and it was about Emma. That was absolutely true. But it was also about something else, something he'd only been able to name in the weeks since he'd stepped back into the work. He'd been afraid. Not of failure. He'd failed before, the Le Mans race, other smaller failures along the years. And he knew how to be with failure, how to extract from it what it had to teach and move forward. The fear was something older and less named, the fear of caring about something and losing it, the fear that had arrived with his wife's illness and had never fully left, the specific knowledge, learned at great cost, that the things you care most about are the things that have the most capacity to leave you. So he'd contracted, made himself smaller, made his stakes lower, made the circle of things he cared about tight enough that the perimeter could be defended. Emma. The job. The apartment with the water-stained ceiling. He'd made his life manageable by making it narrow. And what he was discovering now, what the last several weeks had been demonstrating, one ordinary day at a time, was that he'd been wrong about the math. Narrow didn't mean safe. It just meant that the fear got quieter, which he'd mistaken for the fear being gone, which was different. The fear of caring about something and losing it didn't dissolve when you stopped caring about things. It just moved inside the perimeter and lived there with you. He was thinking about this when Victoria came through the break room door. She stopped when she saw him. "I thought everyone had gone," she said. "Almost everyone," he said. She looked at the coffee in his hand. "Is that the break room coffee?" "Yeah." "It's terrible." "I know," he said. "I've been meaning to address it." She got herself a cup anyway and sat down across the table from him. And for a few minutes they just sat in the quiet of the building with their respective bad coffees, which was its own kind of comfortable. The comfortable of people who have spent enough time working alongside each other that silence doesn't require management. "How are you doing?" she said. He looked at her. It was a simple question, and she asked it like she meant it, which was something he was still getting used to from her, the directness of genuine inquiry, without the social buffer that most people put between themselves and an actual answer. "Better," he said. "I think better is the right word." "Not great? Not wonderful?" "Better is accurate," he said. "I don't trust wonderful." She looked at her coffee. "That's honest." "You've said you appreciate honest." "I do," she said. "I just don't always love it in the moment." She paused. "I wanted to tell you something about the protocol." "Okay." "When I named it after you, I didn't do that just because you found the switch, or found the chassis fracture, or identified the hydraulic leak." She held her cup in both hands. "I did it because of what you said to me, in the client wing that first night, when I asked who you were." He was quiet, waiting. "You said you were someone who kept the building clean," she said, "and I said that's what you do, not who you are." She looked at him. "I've been thinking about that, because I've met a lot of people who do impressive things, and most of them, they define themselves by what they do. The title, the position, the accomplishment. You were the opposite. You'd buried what you did so completely that it wasn't even in the room anymore, and what was left was—" She paused, choosing the word carefully. "Integrity, I think. Just the integrity of a person without the credentials attached." Logan sat with this for a moment. "I wasn't trying to demonstrate anything," he said. "I know," she said. "That's the point." He looked at the table. He thought about 4 years of mopped floors and cleaned glass and lunches eaten in an employee break room while 15 feet away, people with laptops and certifications worked on cars that his hands understood better than theirs ever would. He thought about Emma in the employee lounge with her oatmeal raisin cookie and her book, waiting with the patient loyalty of a child who has decided that wherever her father is, that's where she is. He thought about Rachel, Emma's mother, his wife, and about the specific quality of her laugh, which was the thing he missed most, more than her voice or her presence or any of the other specific losses that accumulated in the years after. Her laugh had been a whole-body event. She'd never done anything halfway. He thought about what she would have said if she could have seen him at Meridian, mopping floors in his maintenance uniform. He thought she probably would have understood, and he thought she probably also would have given him about 2 years before she started telling him he was being an idiot. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes," Victoria said. "Why didn't you have a chief of staff or whoever normally—" He searched for the framing, "whoever normally watches for things like the Bay 6 car, like the log discrepancies." Victoria was quiet for a moment. The question had landed somewhere particular. He could tell by the way her posture shifted, barely, the small physical tell of a person who has been found out on something. "I had a CFO who handled the fleet budget," she said, "and the previous technical manager who handled operations. And I trusted those structures to function without my direct involvement." She paused. "I run 3 companies. I can't be physically present everywhere I'm responsible for." "That's reasonable," Logan said. "But," she said, because she'd heard the unspoken continuation. "But the fleet isn't a financial line item," he said. "It's a collection of mechanical objects that exist in physical reality and have physical states that numbers on a screen can't fully capture. You knew that. You built your career on understanding systems at that level. You just... He stopped. I let someone else tell me the number on the screen was accurate, she said. Yeah. She looked at her coffee cup. That's a version of exactly the mistake you told me about, in Bahrain, looking at the data instead of the car. Yes, he said. It is. She absorbed this. He could see her absorbing it, the slight tension of someone integrating an uncomfortable parallel. He hadn't said it to make her uncomfortable. He'd said it because it was true, and because she was the kind of person who, if you gave her true information, would do something useful with it rather than defend herself from it. I'm going to come to the weekly team meeting every other week, she said, not to manage, just to stay close to the physical reality of it. That would be good, Logan said. And I'm going to ask you to tell me when something seems like I should know it, even if it's uncomfortable. I'll do that, he said. I've been doing that. I know, she said. I'm asking you to keep doing it. She stood up. She took her coffee cup to the sink, rinsed it, set it on the drying rack, which was a detail that Logan noticed because it was the kind of detail that told you something real about a person. The gap between who people perform themselves to be and what they actually do when they're in a kitchen by themselves. Emma's school, she said, at the door. The spring assembly. She mentioned it. Logan looked up. She mentioned it to you? She emailed me, Victoria said. She found my public address through the company website and emailed me to invite me to her school assembly next week. She said, and I'm quoting, "My dad will probably forget to mention it because he doesn't like to bother people." Logan closed his eyes briefly. She's not wrong, he said. I know, Victoria said. I've been working with you for 6 weeks. She looked at him. I'd like to go, if that's all right. He looked at her. Victoria Sterling, who ran 3 companies, who owned 14 extraordinary machines that he now spent his days caring for, who had looked at him across a garage full of people and asked a question that nobody had asked him in years. Emma will be very pleased with herself, he said. Good, Victoria said. She should be. She got the address right and everything. She said good night. He heard her footsteps cross the main bay and the sound of the front entrance, and then the building settled into the full quiet of an empty space. Logan sat for another few minutes. He thought about Emma's email, the phrasing of it, the directness, the particular lack of sentimentality that was entirely her own. My dad will probably forget to mention it because he doesn't like to bother people. He thought about his daughter at 10 years old, navigating the world with the unsentimental practicality of someone who had grown up watching an adult do hard things without making them dramatic and had absorbed that as a working philosophy. She was going to be formidable. She already was. He just hadn't always been in the position to see it clearly. He got up. He rinsed his own cup and set it on the rack next to Victoria's. He walked through the main bay one last time before he left, the way he'd started doing at the end of each day. Not to check anything specific, but to be present in the space, to let his eyes and his instincts make a final pass over everything. It was a habit from the racing years, the last walk of the day, after the work was done. The final confirmation that the machines were right. The Le Mans prototype sat in its bay, brake system serviced, fluid correct, calipers good. The Swiss Hypercar sat in its bay, aerodynamics calibration resolved, the active system now responding with the precision it had been designed for. The endurance racers, the sports cars, the current generation hypercar with its 4-year waiting list, each in its place, each in a known and documented state, each carrying the record of its condition in a system that reflected physical reality rather than optimistic entries. Bay 6 was empty. The Kellerman was with Chen, where it would be for the next several months, being carefully rebuilt from a point of structural failure back to something that could carry weight again. Logan stood in the empty bay for a moment. There was something about an empty bay that had its own kind of presence, the negative space of a thing that was supposed to be there and wasn't, the shape of an absence. He thought about absence, about the version of himself that had been absent from this world for 4 years, and the version that had reappeared in it, and whether those were really 2 different people or just the same person at different distances from himself. He'd been thinking lately about what the right answer to Victoria's question actually was. The question she'd asked the first night, standing in the bay with her car running behind her. Who are you? He'd given her his name and his former career, and the broad shape of the years between then and now. And those things were true. But they weren't the full answer, because the full answer was more complicated and less tidy than any version he could deliver in a garage with an audience. Who he was, a man who had learned that the thing you spend years trying to put down doesn't disappear when you set it aside. That competence is a form of character, that showing up quietly and doing real work, even when nobody is watching, doesn't diminish the work. It proves something about the person doing it that a resume never could. Who he was. A father. That was first. Always first. And he'd spent 4 years thinking that first meant it had to be only, and he understood now that was wrong. Emma hadn't needed him to erase himself. She'd needed him to be present. He'd confused the two. Who he was. Someone still learning how to be in a world he'd stepped back from, still finding the edges of how much it cost to care about things again, and determining that the cost was worth it. The spring assembly was on a Wednesday. Victoria arrived before he did, which he should have predicted, and was sitting in the third row of the Westfield Elementary Auditorium with a reserved expression that he recognized as her version of actively trying not to look like she was the most out-of-place person in the room, which she was, in the specific way of someone who is entirely comfortable in boardrooms and entirely uncertain of the social protocols of a school assembly involving construction paper decorations and a recorder performance by the 4th grade. Logan sat beside her. "How long have you been here?" he said. 20 minutes, she said. "Why?" "I didn't want to be late." He looked at the 3rd grade section of the auditorium, where Emma was visible sitting very straight in her row with the expression of someone who had organized something and was now waiting to observe whether it executed correctly. When she spotted Logan, she gave him a small, controlled nod. When she spotted Victoria, the controlled nod became a brief but unmistakable expression of satisfaction, the look of someone whose plan had come together. "She's going to be insufferable about this," Logan said. "She should be," Victoria said. It was a well-executed plan. The assembly was 45 minutes long. The recorder performance was technically imperfect and entirely sincere. Emma's class presented a project on local history that Emma had clearly provided more research for than the rest of the class combined, in the way that her teachers had apparently learned to expect and accommodate. There was a portion in the middle where the principal said some things about community and growth and the coming summer, and Logan sat in a folding chair in a Westfield Elementary auditorium and watched his daughter sit very straight in her row and thought that this was also the work. This was also the real work, the thing that had required 4 years of early mornings and bad coffee and mopped floors and patience with a world that didn't always see you. This. Emma sitting straight in her row, prepared, capable, sure of herself in the way that kids are sure of themselves when they've been given a consistent foundation to stand on. After the assembly, Emma found them in the corridor. She looked at Victoria first because Logan's presence she'd expected. She surveyed Victoria with the same assessing look she turned on most situations, and then she said, "You sat in the 3rd row." "Yes," Victoria said. "The sightline from the 3rd row is better than the 1st, Emma said. "I know," Victoria said. "I checked." Emma considered this for a moment. She appeared to approve. "My recorder part was in the 2nd movement," she said, "in case you were wondering which one was me." "I could tell," Victoria said. Emma looked at her. "Really? You were the one who came in precisely on the correct beat when the rest of the group was half a beat behind," Victoria said. It was noticeable. Emma looked at Logan with an expression that said, very clearly, that she had assessed Victoria Sterling and found her to be a person of discernment. "Do you want to get lunch?" Emma said to both of them. They ate at a diner 3 blocks from the school. Not the Thai restaurant, not somewhere expensive, just a diner with good enough sandwiches and booths that were slightly too small for 3 people in a school bag. Emma sat across from both of them and ate her turkey club with the organized efficiency of someone who had decided that this meal was logistical rather than social. And between bites, she asked Victoria 3 questions about how cars were built that were more technically specific than most adults Logan knew could manage. Victoria answered all 3 correctly and completely. Emma received the answers, filed them, asked a follow-up on the second one, and received that answer too. Logan ate a sandwich and watched the 2 of them talk. He thought about the apartment on Callaway Street and the water-stained ceiling that still hadn't been fixed. He thought about the folding table with the broken leg and the small bedroom that was still the largest room in the apartment because that had been non-negotiable. He thought about the red can of bad coffee and Emma's oatmeal raisin cookie and the card sitting in the silverware drawer. He thought about the Kellerman in Bay 6, being rebuilt piece by piece in Chen's facility outside the city, a stress fracture carefully addressed, the structure restored to what it was meant to be. Months of patient work on something that most people would have written off as too far gone, too damaged to be worth the cost of returning. He thought that this, too, was what the last 6 weeks had been. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just the slow, careful work of restoring something to its functional state, of finding where the fracture was and addressing it, of returning something that had been held in a kind of suspension back to the conditions it needed to do what it was built to do. He was not fixed. He wasn't going to pretend that. He still woke up at 4:47 from a sleep that wasn't always restful. He still had evenings where the apartment was too quiet and the quiet had a particular shape that reminded him of what used to fill it. He still carried the weight the way you carry weight that has been with you long enough to become structural, not always consciously, but always there, redistributed through everything else. But the weight was carrying him forward now rather than holding him still. That was the difference. That was what the past weeks had shown him, one ordinary day at a time. Emma was explaining something to Victoria about the historical inaccuracy of a textbook she was currently annoyed with. Victoria was listening with genuine attention and asking the kind of questions that demonstrated she was tracking the argument rather than just waiting for it to finish. Logan put down his sandwich. "Hey," he said. Both of them looked at him. "Thanks," he said. He said it to both of them, without specifying what he meant, because what he meant was too large to itemize, and he suspected they both understood it anyway. Emma looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her turkey club. "You're welcome," she said, and went back to the textbook problem. Victoria looked at him for a moment longer. She had an expression he'd seen on her face a few times now. The real one. The one that existed underneath the professional composure, that appeared in the spaces between what she was managing. Something that looked like the specific satisfaction of a person who made a decision that was right and knows it and is glad. She looked back at Emma. "Which textbook?" she said. "The gray one," Emma said. "American history. The section on industrial development is, honestly, really incomplete." "Show me," Victoria said. Emma pulled the textbook out of her bag with the alacrity of someone who has been waiting to show this to someone capable of appreciating it. Logan finished his sandwich. Outside the diner windows, the city carried on. The ordinary Wednesday noon of a city that doesn't slow down for anything, that moves continuously through its own indifferent momentum. People walked past on the sidewalk. A delivery truck double-parked across the street. Somewhere a dog was doing something about a pigeon. And in a diner booth 3 blocks from Westfield Elementary, a 10-year-old girl explained what was wrong with a history textbook to a billionaire who was taking notes on her phone. While the man between them who had been invisible for 4 years sat in the ordinary warmth of a Wednesday lunch and felt, for the first time in a long time, the particular fullness of a life that was using all of itself. Not perfect, not resolved into some clean, conclusive shape. There would be more mornings at 4:47. There would be hard days at the facility and difficult calls and things that broke in ways he hadn't anticipated and would need to find the fix for. There would be evenings in the apartment when the quiet had its shape, but there would also be this, the work he was built for. The daughter who had grown into someone remarkable. The morning walks through the facility bay. Chen's voice on the phone describing what the Kellerman's chassis looked like with the fracture repaired. Clean, Logan, it's clean. And the specific satisfaction of a thing returned to what it was supposed to be. The inertia switch had been pressed. Everything that had been held back had begun, finally, to move. And Logan Hayes, who had been, for 4 years, the man nobody saw, sat in a diner booth on a Wednesday in spring and let himself quietly be seen.